Please mute your lines, and if you do have a question or a comment, then you're welcome to come off of the mute and ask. And also, if you could please do not put your line on hold, because often that leaves us with music being piped in here. So thank you very much. Welcome to everyone who's joined us this morning. It sounds like we have more folks joining us. Welcome. I'm Julie Eklund. I am the Director of Planning at the Coordinating Board. I've had the opportunity to meet many of you over the last year. Janet Benke retired in April, and I took her position, and it's been an exciting year working with the accountability system and the accountability groups. In a few minutes, we're going to look at some of the changes that were made to the accountability system for this year, and then we're going to move on to the probably the most important part of our agenda today, and that's to look at the critical fields. That's to look at the criteria for the accountability peer groups and review that. And we are charged with making a recommendation to the coordinating board commissioner. So before we begin that, though, I'm going to go online. We'll walk through the changes to the accountability system for this year. As you know, one of the charges to the accountability peer groups last year was to go over the measures and make recommendations for changes. Some of those recommendations have been adopted. There are some that we'll certainly consider moving forward. And if we have time at the end of the meeting today, I'd like to talk a little bit about future changes, any recommendations people have as we move forward for measures. Okay, so I'm going to head over to where I can access the internet.
We can do introductions. I'm Susan Brown. I'm Assistant Commissioner for Planning and Accountability. So, or hey you or whatever. It doesn't really matter. People holler at me all the time. So we can go around and introduce. You can go ahead and be pulling it up.
Okay, that's a great idea.
And we can do the introductions. And we can start over here with Catherine.
Hi, I'm Catherine Parsoneau, formerly Coordinating Board and since February 1st, Associate Vice Provost for Planning and Assessment at Texas Tech University.
Vicki West, Institutional Research at Texas Tech.
Hi, I'm Paul Meyer. I'm Vice Provost for Academic Affairs at Texas A&M University, Corpus Christi.
I'm Terry.
I'm Ron High, Associate Provost for Academic Excellence at UNT Dallas.
Thank you.
I'm Terry Tatum. I'm Interim Director of Planning and Institutional Research at Texas A&M Corpus Christi.
I'm Joe Meyer. I'm Director of Institutional Research at Texas State University.
And I'm Beth Weist, and I'm the Associate Vice President for Institutional Effectiveness at Texas State.
Marcelo Paredes, Assistant Director, Institutional Research and Effectiveness, Texas Pan American.
International. David Troutman, Assistant Director for Strategic Initiatives at the University of Texas System.
Allison Danforth, Manager for Reporting and Analysis at UT Austin.
Candy Tayebi, Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs and Graduate Dean at Sam Houston State University.
Dan Edelman, Associate Provost, Texas A&M University Commerce.
Yeah, push the little button so you're on.
Greg Marsh, Director of Institutional Research, reporting at Lamar University.
Dwayne Gardner, AVP for Academic Affairs at A&M Kingsville.
Crystal Braden, Director of Institutional Planning, Policy and Effectiveness, Angelo State.
Mark Amner, I'm Assistant Provost of Institutional Research and Data Management at Texas Women's University.
Salma Firdaus, Director of Analysis and Certification, University of Texas at San Antonio.
And Steve Wilkerson, Associate Vice Provost for Institutional Research, University of Texas San Antonio.
Nick Valsick, Associate.
Okay, and I don't think that mic is on.
It is not on.
That mic is. Thank you. No, it's definitely not on.
told myself I'd give myself until about mid-March.
Okay. Anybody else on the phone?
Libby Barlow from the University of Houston.
Serena Phillips from Texas A&M Central Texas.
Aaron Hall from Stephen F. Austin.
Peggy Johnson, University of Clear Lake.
Okay, Peggy, we can hardly hear you. If you'll move a little closer to the phone, that'd be great if you ask a question.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Not barely.
Barry Kelly.
I took it off of speaker.
Okay. We can hear you now, Peggy.
Thank you.
All right. Go ahead.
Kathy Chambers, University of North Texas at Dallas.
Rachel Allen, Texas Women's University.
Test. Okay.
And Gary's on.
Gary Johnstone, Deputy Assistant Commissioner, Coordinating Board.
All right.
Gary Kelly at West Texas A&M University.
Upinder Mahan at UHV, Associate Provost.
Okay. And now Julie's going to walk us through the accountability system and highlight some of the changes that were made this year.
Thank you, Susan. Okay, we actually had quite a few changes this year. I want to point out a couple of key changes. I think everyone's aware now that we have included career schools and non-Texas public four-year institutions in the accountability system. If you can look where I've got the arrow pointing, you can see where it says four-year institutions, not Texas public. I want to point out that this group does not include the ICUT institutions, the independent colleges and universities of Texas. But the reason that we did not call these career institutions is because this group includes all institutions except the ICUTs and, of course, the Texas publics that have a presence in Texas. So we have some out-of-state public institutions on this list, as well as several national private institutions and some local private institutions. There are also some religious institutions. So the list of all the institutions included is in the drop-down box for the four-year not Texas public, as well as for the two-year career schools. Another feature that's new this year is we have included, for some of the key measures, statewide totals. We haven't had this in the past. I think this is something that's certainly going to be very useful to us because we get a lot of calls from legislators and other stakeholders and newspapers, et cetera, who want information about all the public institutions. And in the past, we've had to cobble that together. So now, for some of those key measures, we've included statewide totals in the accountability system, and we have included the breakouts for the different groups. This is just for public higher education institutions. So you'll see here for participation, we have a fall head count, and we have the head count by ethnicity. And moving on, for example, if you look at success, we have degrees and certificates awarded, STEM degrees, and persistence rates, so and our graduation rates. So several of the key measures are here with statewide totals. So if you're looking for that information, it should be an easy and convenient place to find it. I want to point out something also, and I'm going to go into the universities to do this. We have now added a link at the top of the page that says always show contextual measures. If you click on it, it will say always hide contextual measures. If you are in the accountability system at your institution and you don't want to have to go through the process of every time clicking to see the additional measures, the contextual measures, all you need to do is select the Always Show Contextual Measures button, and every time you go in on your computer, it will show all of the measures. So hopefully this will make it easier for those of you who are frequently in this system. Okay, another new feature this year is instead of the definitions having to hover over the name of the measure to get the definition, because sometimes this was challenging for folks so they didn't realize it was there, we've now included a little I for information button after each measure. And hovering over this button will produce the definition for that measure. So that's also a new feature that we built into the system for this year. In terms of specific changes to the measures, we have removed the category multiracial, one of which is African American, and we have rolled those students up with the African American students. The numbers were very small over the last few years when we included that category, and we decided it was just more appropriate to combine those two categories together. The other multiracial students are included in the other category. We've also added some new information to the detail button on the very first category for our enrollment, and that is undergraduate status enrollment information. What you're looking at is statewide, but we included a first time in college count because we've been frequently asked for that, a first-time transfer count, and then an other undergraduate count. So this is, again, another breakdown, I think a useful breakdown. This is one I believe that this group asked for last year of your participating students, in addition, of course, to the measures that we've had in the past. Okay, scrolling through, we added additional hours to our measure for SCHs taken at two-year colleges because we were asked for more detail on this information. It used to go up to 42, and then 43 plus hours were combined. So we've given you a little more detail on this measure for undergraduate students. We've also included an awarded core and an associate degree category. And if a student received an associate degree, we don't include them in the core category, and that should be explained. Okay. We have a new measure, undergraduate efficiency ratio. This was included because this is a measure that we have in the almanac, and we also wanted to include it in the accountability system. We don't have statewide data, of course, for this measure, but it will be there for every institution. Next year, we are going to update the developmental education measures. I think at the accountability meeting last March, I shared with you the new format for those reports. But for now, we've got the existing reports, but you'll see starting next year that we have redone these reports. I think made them a little clearer. That's going to be, I think, more and more important, especially for community colleges as they have success points that are tied to developmental education. But again, I think there's a lot of focus on developmental education, even at universities. We wanted to make those measures as clear as possible. Okay. There's a few things we did just to make life easier for you. We increased the size of some of our comment boxes on measures 37 and 38. We've included larger boxes. So there were a lot of small requests like that went through. And of course, in terms of the faculty information and the faculty awards, we've expanded those categories. There's a certification process for those NRUF institutions to certify the data that they're adding because the data in accountability that you include is used for NRUF purposes for the emerging research institutions. And then we have a little bit of a new layout for our total revenue and a little bit of a new layout for endowment. But the revenue, we've moved the categories around a little bit. So that's here. So those are the main things for the university measures that were incorporated. Thank you all for your suggestions, and we'll certainly be open to other suggestions this afternoon for what we might want to think about doing for next year.
Does anybody have any questions about what was done, or it's all pretty straightforward?
On the new area where it has
yes.
Some of the salary information, are there, when I went in, I couldn't find
Well, the faculty measures are included in the other categories, and they're just grouped under faculty information. So I believe if you go and find those measures, for example, if you look at measure 34, if we go to excellence, you'll find there's the faculty measure there. So I believe if you look for those categories under the closing the gaps headings, you should find the comment boxes. Yes. If you don't, please let me know. the other thing we decided in working through this process for the first time, at least for me, for the first time this year, is that there's really a need for us to better define our full-time student equivalents and full-time faculty equivalents. For some measures we use, for student equivalents, we use just funded students, and for other measures we use all students. There's some variability in terms of the faculty equivalents, in terms of, sometimes we just use teaching faculty. Sometimes, for example, for the HRIs, we changed a measure just to use faculty that had some kind of a research component. So we understand that that's confusing in terms of the questions I've received this year from folks in the system wanting to understand how we calculate various measures. Many of them have tied into those FTSEs and the full-time faculty equivalents. So we hope to put together some kind of guideline that addresses not only the measures in accountability, but also the measures in the almanac and anywhere else that we use full-time student and faculty equivalents, to make that a little bit easier for you to try to replicate the measures back at your institutions. Yes, question?
We can discuss that. One of the things that we have thought we could do, and this might lead into the
questions, please.
He was asking. Paul was asking if we had thought about looking at our enrollment counts to get a better picture for those students who do mini-mesters, that sort of thing, not the more the non-traditional. And so one of the things that we can do, and something we do for the community colleges already, is we show their fall headcount enrollment, which is the census date, but we also show an annual unduplicated count. And that may be something y'all want to discuss later when you get more into the talking about the different measures and possible changes. Because I do know that there are a lot more institutions that are doing that sort of thing, some of those mini-mesters and that.
Yes, generally, I think having a discussion about the flex courses, which right now are not included when we do the fall enrollments, I think that's an important discussion to have. How many institutions who are here do have flex courses that begin after the census date, especially in the fall?
Everybody.
Everybody. Okay, that's very helpful. Very helpful to know.
So that's something we could do, and that would kind of show the difference between what you're getting for the fall semester and the others.
Do we have a question from the field, or I guess not? Please remember also to mute your phone if you're at your home institution. Okay. Well, if there aren't additional questions about the changes for fall, I think we'll move to the next part of our agenda, which is the discussion of the accountability peer group criteria. The handouts that you all received coming in relate to this portion of the meeting, and those of you at home should have received handouts this morning. What we're going to do? Oh, Susan.
Yeah, I'm going to say a little. The reason we're going to be looking at this is we have not made any changes to the peer group and looking at what's required to become what are the different peer groups since 2004. So we're coming up on 10 years now. So it's about time we do a review of these, kind of update some of the numbers, look at where everything's headed, and go from there. So we're going to get your recommendations, and then we will make a recommendation to the commissioner, who will take it to our committee March 20-something.
7th, I think, yeah.
Somewhere in March,
yeah,
whenever our committee meets, and then it'll go to the board for adoption. So that's what this whole next section is looking at.
And what we're going to do for this section is we're going to break up into two groups. We're going to send the research and emerging research institutions into the Tejas room, which is the door just in the back here of the boardroom. We have a conference room there. We have set up a phone number for those folks from emerging research and research institutions who want to listen in on that meeting, and I would assume it would be all of you who are participating. We did send the conference line number. I will read it for you now. It's 1-888-398-2342, and the access code for that room is 1065683. So please call in to the Tejas room for that portion of the meeting. Susan Brown will be facilitating that, and Jose Rijos is here. He will also be working with that group. The doctoral, comprehensive, and master's institutions will stay here in the boardroom. So if you are part of one of those institutions, you're welcome to stay in the room. Obviously, those folks from system offices can choose which group they would like to join for this morning's discussion. So again, if those of you from the research and emerging research institutions could head to the Tejas room. And everyone else, if you wouldn't mind moving up, I think it might, if you're comfortable, that's fine. If you'd like to move up, it might help facilitate our discussion. I also want to add that Gabriela Borkaman has arrived, and she and I will be working with the doctoral, comprehensive, and master's institutions. I'm actually going to call up the current criteria for the groups we're working with here. It's not all going to fit, but we can do a little scrolling if we need to.
I think he already sent it.
Okay, I'm thinking we could. I guess we can have a discussion. You know what? I think maybe Gabrielle and I will move down. Oh, I guess this is okay. But please don't be shy about participating, because this part of the meeting is really all about your feedback. I want to make a couple of comments, some things that we've discussed in terms of looking at the measures. But then I think the best thing to do will be to move forward and look at the data that we have available and discuss the current measures we have and how they might change. But here's a couple of guidelines that we've talked about. One is that we thought it might be important to build a time frame in terms of how long an institution might need to maintain the level of designated in the criterion for whatever measure it happens to be. So maintain a certain number of PhD programs or PhD students, endowment, et cetera. So that's one thing that we talked about, rather than just saying here are the levels, and as soon as your institution reaches these levels, they will all automatically be jumped up to the next peer group. We thought it might make sense to build in some kind of a time frame. Do folks think that makes some sense?
What it means is that if you reach the level that should push you in the other higher group, let's say higher group, you should maintain that level for about 2 or 3 years, or whatever the discussion would be, before you officially are moved to that group.
Well, that's another thing that we had talked about. Yes. Yeah, we discussed that if we're going to add elements, if we're going to add metrics and other elements to this, we could also talk about the possibility of having an institution reach, for example, 6 of 7. Today we have provided you data for 7 elements, so we will look at those measures, but that's another possibility because we haven't had as many metrics that we've looked at. So something to think about as we have this discussion. And I don't think we need to decide that now, but I wanted folks to keep that in mind as we're having the discussion, that it may make sense to, again, build in that levels need to be maintained for a certain period, and also think about the fact that maybe not every metric, because the more you add, of course, the harder it's going to be for an institution. So think about that part of it. The other thing we thought it was important to think about is building in some kind of an adjustment for inflation, so to speak, so that, and especially in terms of the monetary metrics for endowment, restricted research expenditures, those types of measures, we thought it might be important to think about over time, so we're not caught in this position, 9 years later from when these were first developed, of saying, wow, these don't really make sense anymore, and suddenly everybody's shifted simply because enrollments have gone up and funding has gone up and that sort of thing. So that's another thing that we talked about, is thinking about how we might build that in some kind of way. The other thing that we discussed a little bit, and again, this will be dependent on our conversation today, but the other thing we talked about a little bit is, would it be appropriate to combine any of these three groups that we have here, the doctoral, the comprehensive, and the master's. We talked about the comprehensive and the master's. Obviously, that's the majority of the institutions. We could also talk about the doctoral groups. But we wanted to open that up as part of the discussion. When the accountability groups first met, they had some very specific charges where they were working on, for example, issues like value added, where I think there was a sense that it was very important to have the group separated as they were. Moving forward, folks might still feel that's critical. They might feel like these groups are very different, and the discussions that these groups would have would really vary in terms of these institutions' missions, et cetera. Or there might be a sense that, yes, it would be appropriate to combine these groups moving forward. So I wanted to raise that possibility, and again, that's something that will be open for discussion. So what we have given you is data related to 7 criteria. We have separated it out by type of institution to make it a little bit easier. Some of it is simply sorted in alphabetical order. The first 2 measures we're going to look at, and then some of the later measures were sorted based on one of the categories, and went from the highest to the lowest. So if you're wondering why we have the order we do, that's why we do. And some of that was simply because it made it easier for us to sort the data into the appropriate categories. So we have the packet. If people are amenable, we can move forward in terms of looking at it measure by measure in the order that we have them, or we can mix it up. But I did want to add that you have a handout that has the current criteria. So hopefully that will make it a little bit easier to see what we have now and think about what we want to have moving forward. Yes. No, these are the ones. Yeah. These came from the criteria that are online for all the institutions.
The underlined thing here.
Right, and the reason the underlines are here is I went through and tried to pull from the text information about very specific measures. Some of the language in the criteria is general. Some of it's more specific. Because we had different groups working on these originally, they formatted them in different ways. So you'll see for the research universities, we have bullets, and for some of the other institutions, it's in a narrative form. So especially in the cases where it was in a narrative form, I went through and tried to underline some of the main areas of focus for these categories. And again, you'll see some of them are more data specific, and some talk more generally about the types of programs that an institution offers and the types of institutional mission. So that's what we have to start with. Basically, our task is to rethink these criteria or decide that they're appropriate for the institutions represented here now, the doctoral, comprehensive, and master's institutions, make any changes, and then submit that recommendation to our commissioner, who will then bring a recommendation to our board at their meeting at the end of March. Okay, so everyone's clear on the charge. Are there any questions or comments before we begin? It's a very quiet group. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Okay.
Anybody who is online? So no questions from online attendees?
This seems like a good way to start for me.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the other thing that's probably important is to look around the edges. So as we're looking at each group, think about the group above and the group below. And obviously that's a little harder to do with the doctoral group since the emerging research group is meeting separately. But we can look at the criteria that they have now also as we have this discussion. Okay, well, let's start with looking at restricted research expenditures. And this has been a category that's been important in the research and in the emerging research group. It has been less important moving to the other groups, though we do have, as you will see in the doctoral university categories, research expenditures of at least $2 million per year. And if you look at our information, this actually goes from 2012 to 2008. We have a range for our doctoral group going from under $1 million to over $10 million.
Julie, this is Paul Meyer, Texas A&M Corpus Christi. I do have a question about the restricted research expenditures.
Okay.
So I actually had a few years ago I had the advantage of actually sitting in with the researchers in emerging research group as they were sort of discussing how those are defined and how they were reviewing research expenditures from some institutions to decide what should count.
Yes.
And one of the things that I'm concerned about, because my institution is aspiring to get into the emerging research group, and one of the things that I'm concerned about is that there's not as much sort of transparency as I would like to see about what actually counts and what actually, as emerging or as restricted research. So I think that there are some things going on at our institution that might even be institutionally funded that are not being counted as restricted research expenditures right now, but could be.
Okay.
And so unless we actually sort of see the rules of the game and actually see what the criteria are and see how the decisions are made about what counts as restricted research or not, then we don't even have a kind of a fair way of participating.
Thank you. I will mention, and again, you'll have to look and see what's available, and I'll see if I can bring Ed Buchanan down. Is Gary Johnstone here? And Gary, this might be something that you can help us address. But Ed Buchanan, who works with these numbers, has actually, for the first time this year, posted several spreadsheets that really provide detail about where the numbers come from and what's being posted in accountability, what's being posted in the almanac. And I believe that there may be more information there than you've had in the past in terms of seeing how these are developed. But Gary's going to come and address that question.
Okay. And has that information been sent to the doctoral institutions? Because that's, I think, where, at least for us, we haven't felt like we've been in the loop on where things are with what is counted.
Research expenditures are coming from the sources and uses documents that the finance people at the institutions are submitting to the coordinating board, and that's where and also I'll get Julie the link to on our website where all the institutional data that's reported in accountability, including restricted research, and how it's being reported to us from your institution. Because that's where we're getting restricted research numbers, is from the finance people are categorizing research into education in general funded or restricted funded. And that's where we get the information.
Yeah, but aren't there though fairly kind of extensive discussions, or haven't there been in the past among the the emerging research universities about what counts, and or I mean, have the other institutions had access to those conversations so that they have a better idea of what can be counted as research?
I believe there was discussions, and it's come back to how is it being reported on your annual financial reports, in the annual financial report that's submitted by the institution. How are they categorizing the research as to the funding method, the funding categories of research? And so we're through those discussions. The decision was made to use the sources and uses document as to how the school has categorized the research as whether it's restricted, which is from an external funding source, or is it education in general or designated funds used to fund that research. And I was not in those discussions. I think a lot of those discussions took place in the academic affairs area with some of our finance people.
I also want to mention, I believe we have built the link to that information into the accountability system. So if you look at the measures related to research expenditures, there's a link at the bottom. We actually added several web links this year to the accountability system so folks can get more information if there's more information related to a measure somewhere else on our website.
Okay,
so I'll go ahead and show you that.
That's where we'll start.
After the break.
Okay.
Yeah, but we have tried to, because I think it in some ways was confusing to folks to see information and accountability on the almanac, different places, and wonder how does that all tie into sources, uses, and other details. So we do have these spreadsheets now that I think should be very helpful to see what comes from where. Thank you. That's a good question. Any other questions related to the restricted research expenditure?
Yes, that's what I'm going back and forth. I'm listening.
Okay, and again, for doctoral institutions, we were looking at $2 million per year. For other institutions, we did not include restricted research benchmark.
We're not getting there for a long time. Okay, yeah. What is this for? What is this thing? Research expenditures?
Is anybody who wouldn't like this included?
Oh, we're down. Yeah, we're down in mastery.
Are there any suggestions for raising or lowering the levels?
I just have a general comment. I'm watching online and also have phoned in, obviously. And if everyone could just mute after they talk, it would be very helpful because I'm getting cross feedback here.
It's from online. We were about to mention it.
Thanks.
Yes, we've tried to say that. Please mute if you're online, and then if you're here with us, if that little red light is on in your microphone, it means it's on. Otherwise, it's off. But I haven't heard the background noise here.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much. All right.
Thank you, and I'll try to make sure to shut mine off too. Okay. So
Can I just ask one question to follow up on what Paul said? What the answer was is that it's still just external sources, but I think Paul was getting at what kinds of things we're counting as research for that, correct? And that's where we're not getting answers. We're having a similar problem.
Okay, even though it's submitted from your institution.
We're not sure what other institutions are submitting as what they consider that. There doesn't seem to be a clear definition of what counts and what doesn't count as that. And therefore, that needs to be clarified for us.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. That helps me understand.
So in other words, your financial people are not very clear how to report this kind of information.
They can clearly decide whether it's restricted funds or E&G, et cetera. That's what the financial. But then what is considered the research is where the definition is very fuzzy and nobody's really come clear to us about what things would be counted in that. Some are obvious. If this is a NSF grant, that's very obvious. But there's lots of other things that could be on that borderline, and we don't know what other institutions are saying, yes, that counts. or saying, no, we don't count that. We're not sure.
So the main message is we need more consistency in terms of what's being reported, and therefore we need more clarity about what should be reported so that it's more consistent across institutions. Correct. Okay. So we will definitely bring that feedback back to the appropriate folks, and we can have that discussion. I think that's probably a discussion that needs to include finance folks and go beyond this group, but we'll make sure that happens. Any other comments, and do we want to look at the $2 million per year that's in the current definition and think about adjusting that? I think what I'm seeing in terms of the data is it seems to be flat at many institutions moving over time. That seem correct? And speak up if at any point in time you think we've got the wrong data. We've got the behind-the-scenes files for these. So yes, right now I'm talking with doctoral because doctoral is the only group that actually has a dollar figure included for restricted research. Now we can also introduce adding a dollar figure in for comprehensive. So that's another discussion. And again, we see some variability across institutions. Again, if this were the only category used, we would probably see a little bit of shifting in terms of institutions.
So we stay at $2 million a year for now.
People okay at staying at $2 million? Should something be built in? And again, we're at $2 million, and we've got 2 institutions below. We've got some institutions that are significantly above that, but
just following up, Julie, on a comment you just made.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering now how the decision was made 10 or so years ago to align the groups the way they are, because as you look through this document, you'll see, an institution may be real high on one or real low on another, and in fact may not have met the standard on another. Did we take like a overall average or something, or how did you decide who was in what group?
Well, I was not here at the time that those conversations were happening, and neither was Gabriella. I don't know if there's anyone who's here today who was part of those discussions. It would be very helpful if...
So in other words, it is a question for Susan.
Yeah, and I think we'll be happy to...
She was here.
...ask Susan to elaborate on the process. But my sense is that it wasn't just about everyone has to meet all the measures, though that may have been, if we saw the data from 2004, that there were clear delineations. But I think especially with the 3 groups that are meeting today, it was looking at the data overall, as well as looking at the mission of those institutions, the mission of the masters, the mission of the comprehensive institutions, the sense of these are groups that have more in common than not, looking across measures. I think this discussion is a little bit different than emerging research, probably, where there's a lot of focus on metrics. But I think metrics also can and should be an important part of this discussion. It's just how they're incorporated into the process. I think that's certainly something that we can talk about today. This doesn't have to be based on how it was done before, and maybe after we look at all the measures, we'll get a better sense of, hey, this is a good way to think about incorporating them or not incorporating them.
And I think there was also, they were looking at the Carnegie. And plus, you see this data up from 2008. Remember, in 2004, they were looking at data earlier in the decade. Right. So those numbers may have been a little bit different than what you see now. Weren't you part of these discussions?
I was at least on the edge of it, but I don't want to. I don't remember it in enough detail to be able to offer much help, I don't think.
We have no memories at all, so your memories may be better. Anyway.
I had one question. The phrase, in a lot of the new language that's added in here, there's the phrase doctoral-research/scholarship.
Okay.
Can you kind of explain that a little bit?
And where are you looking at that?
I see it under emerging research, where it's talking about 20 doctoral research / scholarship degrees per year, and then also there's a number under for doctoral university. So I was wondering if are some doctoral degrees being counted and other ones not? Is there a distinction between?
Well, remember that in enrollment we don't separate them very well, but in awards then you can separate the PhDs from the professional.
And the decision to bring, and that language actually has been there for quite a while. Our decision today was to bring the PhD awards, but then to bring information about doctoral programs and information about doctoral enrollments. So it would include EDDs, students in other areas. The professional, we have been left out of some of the information, though we do have some information about professional programs that you'll see moving through. But we did separate the PhDs from the other doctorates, and the professional doctorates were removed. Okay. And that's certainly a discussion that we could have. It could be for these particular groups or some of these groups. There should be less emphasis on the PhDs and more emphasis on the number of doctoral programs overall. Again, it's up to the group. Okay, yeah, let's continue through and look at the data that we have so you can see what we brought to you and think about whether these are appropriate and what we want to look at. We do have the PhD award count is next. If there were no numbers at all, it's been left blank. So if there were no PhDs awarded. These do exclude the EDDs, yes. And that, of course, would, if they were included, it would change some of the numbers. But again, we made the decision to include them in the programs, but not in the award count where we included only PhDs.
So all the professional type, like doctorate of music, doctorate of whatever, are excluded.
Right.
Can you explain what your reasoning was behind that for the awards if we included it in the programs? What was the reasoning behind that?
I don't think we include them in the programs either.
Yeah, no, we did. We did? We did. We included all doctoral programs. We have the doctoral and then the professional. So the doctoral will include the EDDs and the
So can you explain why the reasoning behind that then would be to include them one place, not to include them another?
I think a lot of that had to do with the emerging research and the emphasis there on the PhDs versus the other doctorates in terms of those categories and the fact that those categories are now linked to funding. And so that's my sense for why the focus has been on PhDs. Moving into these groups, it's certainly a question that we could raise. But again, if the categories are different across groups, thinking about movement, again, you've got different types of categories. I think that may be okay. It might be better to have the same categories, but then perhaps as you move through the different institution types, think about, well, you only need to, meet the criteria in 5 of the 7 for this group or 3 of the 7 for such and such a group. That's a way we could be thinking about it also.
Was there a sense that there was not research occurring in the EDDs? Because I think in the past, at least I know that our school put through EDDs just because they were in education. Instead of a PhD, even though they do dissertations, they're completely research-oriented, but they're EDDs. And so I'm trying to figure out what the distinction is here.
And it can be a challenge when you look at EDDs because EDDs they're a professional degree. However, even places like Harvard, which has now introduced a PhD, their School of Education traditionally only awarded EDDs, and that has just now changed. And there are other institutions like that where in education just an EDD was awarded and there were research, stronger research components for those EDDs that might have looked more like PhDs at other places. In terms of where things are moving and in terms of the norm, I think the degrees are separate. So that's certainly a comment that we can take into consideration as we move forward. Now, your institution now awards both, or still just awards the EDD? I need my.
the last time we put in through an educational doctorate was the first time we had asked for the PhD on it. But before that, we had always put through them as EDDs. And it was just because they were coming out of the College of Education. And yet they all are set up exactly like a PhD would be set up. And in fact, if you look at the one that is awarded now as a PhD in the College of Ed, it is set up exactly like our EDDs are.
Right.
They're not set up as professional. They're literally set up as research degrees.
Right, and that's why I think it's challenging because different institutions handle those PhDs and EDDs differently. So it does make it a challenge in terms of how they're counted and how they're included. Are there other institutions who are with us today who also have an EDD that is research focused? Yes. Okay.
We are not talking only about EDDs.
No,
there are other professional doctorates, and traditionally they're not so research intensive. And once you say, "Oh, let's include EDDs," then why don't you know?
Right, and the challenge would be if most folks do have a research-based PhD in education and more of applied degree at the EDD level, then it's, I think we have to go with the majority. Is that, well, I just had two folks who responded to my question that they have EDDs that are research-based. 3, okay, and also from Commerce, okay.
Ours is also research-based, and we do receive some grants and research monies as well. It's very similar to PhD.
Okay. All right. Well, then I think that's something we can certainly take into consideration, and we can, mention your concerns to the commissioner when we make recommendations, or if you want to make a recommendation that includes certain degrees. Again, it becomes a challenge because the degree means something different at different places in many cases. Any feedback from those folks who do offer the 2 different degrees? Any sense in terms of how you would like to see this? I know degrees in education are probably the most, in terms of the 3 groups we have today, are probably the most commonly awarded degrees from these institutions, so it's an important topic. Yes?
As I said, we have both a PhD and EDD, and I do think that they're very similar, and I'm wondering if that's something we need to have clarified at the coordinating board. Do they want, if these are research-based, for us to come back through and say these are really PhDs and there's nothing altered in what we've been offering from the very beginning? If they want to lay out what those distinctions are between those 2 degrees so that we can go through our programs to say, no, this is definitely not, and so we would keep that as an EDD, but this one is, and so we should ask for it to be the PhD. There hasn't been guidelines for that.
Yeah, that's a question for our academic affairs staff. We'll tell them. And we can, we'll be happy to share your concerns and your questions, but it's not a question that I can answer in terms of how you should be packaging degrees, so to speak, that you're putting through. Okay, are there any other comments about the PhD awards? I'm going to look back and see what we have for counts. We have, in terms of the doctoral institutions, we have 150 doctoral students. I don't think we have specific information about, 10 doctoral research degrees per year. So again, this particular criteria, and I'm going to look back at the emerging research, we use that same doctoral research, and again, I believe that's moving towards the thinking about that in terms of a PhD. So we have 10 degrees per year for the doctoral institutions, and no number of degrees are specified for the comprehensive institutions. Any sense if that number is appropriate? I'm looking at our numbers here, and we are at 9 for one institution and 11, and then moving up from there. So any sense if that 10, again, is still appropriate for these institutions? And one thing I do want to add is, if a discussion that we had about this criteria, especially if the decision is to leave the groups where they are. This is not a conversation about trying to drop groups out of the groups that they're in. And one thing we had talked about is if folks have been in a group since 2004 and they're comfortable being in that group, we will leave them even if criteria change today, because we are changing the criteria. But it will be something used moving forward as we look at groups and think about where they're categorized. Does that make sense? So this isn't a discussion about, hey, everyone's going to get shifted and I'm going to get shifted. This is a discussion about we have the categories we do. The institutions met the criteria to be in these categories. We intend to maintain these categories unless there was a decision about shifting them in terms of the current institutional presence in the different categories. But we want to have something that's up to date, that makes sense in terms of current data and current institutional mission. Also, it makes sense in terms of the work of the accountability peer groups and the meetings that we're going to have moving forward. Again, as I said earlier, it made sense to have several different groups because of the type of work the accountability peer groups were doing. We may move back into having some of those specific charges that we've had in the past, like looking at student success and looking at value added, though right now, for the last several years, over the last few years, the groups have been meeting together and not separately in terms of activity. So, again, I did want to mention that the intention isn't to drop people down or move them up. So, with that in mind, I think that might make it easier to have a discussion about what would be most appropriate for this group if another institution were to be moved up. Is it appropriate, again, at the doctoral group to still keep us at 10 awards, or would it be more appropriate to increase that number looking at what we have for data? And again, we've got 3 institutions who are quite far above that level, and then we have 3 who are hovering around the 10. Any thoughts?
This is Upinder Mahan from UHV.
Yes.
Julie, where are you seeing these numbers for number of degrees awarded?
Okay, on the email that I sent in the Excel spreadsheet, there were 7 tabs. A tab for each of these measures that we're looking at, for each of the metrics we're looking at. So you should be able to, and it could be your Excel spreadsheet didn't open fully, but you should be able to open it and find tabs for all of the data.
There we are. Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. We can also see the information for the comprehensive institutions, some that have numbers that would move them closer to where we are with doctoral now. Is there any feedback from comprehensive institutions about whether this comprehensive universities about whether this category should remain where it is, should be increased? And what we've seen so far is data that really is pretty varied across these categories, which makes it a challenge. Okay, well, I think we've looked at that. Why don't we move forward for now and look at the next tab or the next page. This is our program count. So these are the number of programs. We actually included masters here because the person who provided us the data included them. So I thought we might as well add those if we could bring it into the conversation if someone wanted to. But we're primarily here looking at the doctoral program counts. Okay. Well, okay. And this is coordinating board. This is from the programs that you report to us on the CBM 003. It's the program inventory.
So because these don't necessarily, from what I can tell, don't match our degree inventory?
Actually, you know what? I'll come to think of it, where this data came from is we had, and it could be there's an issue with it, but the way it was run is all of the for all of these institutions, the number of degrees awarded in all of the different program areas were run, and then we collapsed it so that we got a count of how many, for example, for A&M, how many doctoral programs, in this case it was 89, how many areas in which degrees were awarded. So if you have a new program where no degree is awarded, it won't be included here. Thank you. That's a good clarification. But that's how it was. That's how we produced it for this meeting. Yes,
Julie. Yeah, one area where I would at least raise a question about the criteria would be in the emerging research. Suggesting that the standard should be that the institution offer at least 10 research scholarship research degrees. So that basically would mean sort of 10 PhDs rather than the previous combination of which might have included EDDs and PhDs. It seems to me what would be important if somebody is moving into sort of the research area is really how much research funding they're doing. And I don't think it's a good idea to have kind of an artificial standard that's going to, push somebody to trying to have more PhD programs just to meet a criteria. So I know in our institution we're trying to really sort of specialize in areas. We do a lot in sort of marine area. We're trying to specialize in areas where we really have expertise. And, I can just sort of see us being in kind of a box where we have to turn all of our EDDs to PhDs, and then we have to get more PhD programs, even if that wouldn't be our highest priority.
Okay.
So that's just a suggestion would be to reduce that number. I don't know what other people think.
Okay, so this is the 5 programs that we see for the doctoral institutions. That's on the top.
Well, I'm actually more concerned about the 10 for emerging research.
Oh, okay. So let me go back to emerging research. Okay.
I would agree with my colleague Paul there. I think this tends to imply that the quantity might be more important than quality, and I don't think that's what we're looking for.
Okay, so this is feedback to the emerging research, to the discussion for the emerging research folks, and I will be happy to share that then. And the suggestion there would be 5, or it would be not to include that category. I'm sorry, I want to make sure
I would think a smaller number. I'm not sure what it would be.
Right, and we do have the current 5 for the doctoral institutions. And do you think that's too high for the current doctoral group, or do you think that's appropriate?
I would probably defer more to, master's universities that are close to becoming doctoral that have that as a priority.
Okay. Is there a master's or a comprehensive university that wants to make a comment on that? On the number of doctoral research scholarship programs? And of course, it's PhD students would be the doctoral research scholarship students. No comments?
One criteria we might consider is rather than pick an arbitrary number. I know SACS requires 4 doctoral programs to put you in their highest category, a Class 6 institution. So that's a number that is something beyond an arbitrary number that we might pick.
Okay. And we haven't used SACS criteria in the past, that's my understanding. Gabriella? No, we haven't. So that would be introducing something new. How do other folks feel about that suggestion? Okay. And maybe I can do a little research at lunch and get a feel for who falls into that category. That might be helpful. Okay. Okay, any other suggestions related to program count in terms of including it, not including it?
And please keep up current your program inventory.
Yes, it is very important to do that.
Just collapsing what you report as graduates is not really a good way to do it, but...
And I apologize. We probably should have. We asked for the data, and there might have been some misunderstanding about how to collect it. But
it's up to the institution to keep it current.
Yes.
It's a whole database or whatever. So
right. But if they didn't have a degree awarded in a program, that program. Right. If it's approved, it's in the inventory, but this is data that had actually if degrees were awarded. Yes.
Can you give me an example of what a professional master's degree would be? So I'm thinking about it like at our institution, we have a master's science and accounting degree, which is geared towards the CPA exam, which
this is not professional master's degrees. What's this? This is separated out into master's degrees, doctoral degrees, and then the professional doctoral degrees, which are going to be your MDs.
I'm sorry, I thought I just heard Gabriel say that there was a professional master's degree.
No.
Okay.
No.
Sorry.
Excuse me, this is Karen Hall from Stephen F. Austin. I have a question or a comment.
Sure.
If the SACS criteria is used to define the number of doctoral students within the grouping, I guess I would ask that consideration be made to the fact that SACS does not, as far as I know, maybe I'm wrong, but differentiate between the types of doctoral programs like we were discussing earlier with the research intensive or not. So that, unless I'm wrong about that, that needs to be considered in using that criteria.
Okay, just to make it clear, you're saying that SACS does not differentiate between the different research categories?
No, what I said was that a doctoral program to SACS is a doctoral program. And we were talking earlier, if I understood the conversation correctly, that some doctoral programs are excluded from accounts.
Got it.
And the SACS criteria, as far as I know, does not exclude doctoral programs based upon any criteria. They're a doctoral program or they aren't.
I understand. Thank you.
I would like to go back to an earlier discussion about what is included in whatever. The fact that program count included professional but not the other measures. What is your opinion? I'm not clear what these groups would prefer.
I know personally I would prefer there not to be a distinction. I know most of the historical things I've read say that, yeah, the EDD has a different name, kind of for historical reasons. It's not necessarily a significantly different kind of degree. You could have a criterion that says that for a doctoral program to count, there has to be a certain amount of research done by faculty in the program. That would at least be more consistent than arbitrarily deciding that EDD shouldn't count as research degrees.
I agree with Paul.
And whatever we include in one measure should be in the other, or should we have a difference as we have now?
I don't understand what you're saying.
Well, we didn't include the professional in one measure, but we included in the other one.
Oh,
so,
okay. So you're suggesting
No, I'm asking.
Yes, I understand. So you're saying in terms of the degrees award, we should be consistent in terms of, and rather than have these different categories that are giving us different information. I mean, that's one reason we did want to include the doctoral programs in one of the categories, all the doctoral programs, so we included them in terms of the count. You're suggesting that we include everything is done the same way when we look at doctoral programs, so it'll be any kind of doctoral degree, except for the professional degrees, of course, would be included in the degree count, would be included in the program count, would be included in, and we also have student enrollment information here, and that we're going to get to at the, that's at the end. We have head count enrollment doctoral, and that's going to be the last tab for you folks at home, and maybe since we're having this discussion now, that would be a good one to turn to. It's the last page of the handout for the people who are with us. This comes straight from the accountability system, and this is the doctoral enrollments, which include everything but the special professional doctoral degrees. So the recommendation is to use all the same, and we will, again, we're happy to bring that recommendation forward. Would it be for all the levels then? The suggestion would be to have it, use them all for all the levels. Okay. And do folks think that this is an appropriate measure to include or criteria to include the headcount enrollment for the programs? And this one is kind of interesting. Again, we see the doctoral, in this case, there's a little bit of overlap between doctoral and comprehensive, but this one, the categories in some ways seem to fit a little better. We have, I think, one comprehensive that has a higher doctoral enrollment than some of the doctoral. But after that, the categories, the doctoral are higher than the comprehensive in terms of the number and higher than the master's. Did we want to put a specific number here? Right now we have 150 included for the doctoral, and we don't have a number included for the comprehensive. I mean, I see more than 150 for every one of these institutions for doctoral.
Or you think 150 is too low?
Right. And we didn't include everyone here, so this would be, I think, in terms of the language we use, we need to be very clear in terms of how we categorize these doctoral research scholarship students. If we need to be clear what's PhD, what's all doctoral except for special professional, and what is all three. But do folks think 150 is too low here?
For doctoral?
For the doctoral, yes. And do we want to add something for comprehensive? Because we do have numbers that are growing in terms of the comprehensive institutions, as well as some of the masters. So. And always remember, when something comes from accountability, we could have a misreporting issue, but I think we're... So if you do see something that looks off, it's always good to go back and check. Any comments there? Do folks think this is a good measure to include the headcount enrollment, which we've included in the past? Yeah, I'm seeing nods. Yes. This is a good one. Everyone agrees? Okay. Okay. I mean, basically, we've been looking at the ones that we've had in the past, number of programs, and so we got your feedback on the number of programs. And I do want to mention, for comprehensive, we do talk about numbers. Doctoral education and targeted program areas. In most cases, this is 1 or 2 areas, but maybe as many as 5. Well, let's look back at that program information, because I think we are definitely over 5 for some of our institutions, but I could be wrong. Let's look back. Okay. Well, I see 4, 4, 2. Nope. It looks like we're on the we're very appropriate there in terms of comprehensive. Okay, so are people comfortable with leaving the language in comprehensive in terms of the number of doctoral programs being in 1 or 2 areas, but as many as 5? I think that fits what we're seeing in terms of the data. Okay. Okay. So I don't hear anyone arguing for the comprehensive to add specific numbers beyond what we have right now in that definition in terms of the metrics we've looked at so far. You have a fair number of doctoral students, smaller numbers of programs, but a fairly high head count. Let me look back to that last page with the head count. For some of our comprehensive, Lamar, UTPA, Prairie View, and Stephen F. Austin, and Tarleton, we've got fairly high head counts. We could build something in, or we can leave it as it is. We have head counts in other categories. Nope, everybody's okay with just leaving that general? Okay. Well, let's look at some of the other data that we've provided for you. And some of this is new. Well, we have endowment funds. And we haven't talked about endowment funds. The endowments are, and I'm looking through, have not been included. And this is information that we collect through the accountability system. So we have taken it right from the accountability system. One thing I did want to mention while we're here is we did have 3 institutions who misreported their endowment funds in accountability, which I noticed when I was pulling this data together. We asked that you report it in millions, and we had Tarleton State, Midwestern, and A&M San Antonio report the actual numbers. So either they're beating UT by a lot, or it was reported in actual instead of millions. So I went ahead and made those adjustments for the handout, but this handout doesn't directly reflect accountability because we had that information that was not reported correctly. So if anyone's here from those institutions, if you would please correct that, that would be appreciated. But we do have the data here in millions for total endowment. What do folks think about including endowment as a category? I don't hear any feedback at all. Is this something appropriate maybe for the research and emerging research levels and not appropriate for other levels?
I think it's perfectly appropriate, but I'm looking at ours at Kingsville and Commerce, and I think that those could very well be wrong numbers because in the NM system we often have two endowment accounts, one local and one at the system level.
Okay.
I know in our case only one of those accounts was reported. That may have been the case for the other NM universities as well. I don't know. Looks like it could have been for Commerce.
Okay, so you're saying it looks like the Commerce data is misreported as well as the Kingsville. Generally, in accountability, we have the quasi endowments and the quasi and true, and we have the very detailed description of what the different endowment categories are. I just took the total endowment from that, which seemed to be appropriate. I would think people would agree that that's, if we do anything, that's what should be used. It's amazing how once you start using a measure beyond sort of just posting it in accountability, how quickly misreported data gets cleaned up. I will add that. And so sometimes it is, I certainly don't want to use the fact that we've got some issues with reporting here to prevent us from including it. If you think it's an issue where it's difficult to report that individually because of how it works within the system, that would be helpful to know. But do you think it's just a question here where it just hasn't been characterized correctly?
Yeah, I think we gave you the wrong number.
Okay, that's fine.
The endowment information on the
please
accountability.
correct it.
Excuse me. The endowment information on the accountability report is something that is entered manually. It's not downloaded from anywhere else. So whoever's entering your accountability data needs to enter it based on your definition.
Right, and I thought you understood that, but if you didn't, yes, that's data that your institution enters, which is why I was noting that there were a few that weren't providing it in millions. Okay, so I'm hearing that this might be an okay thing to include. It might not be something to consider, especially if we're going to consider, if we're going to have the conversation about including several of these elements or all of these elements, but not expecting an institution to meet the criteria for every one. I think that changes the conversation from, hey, for anyone to move from this point on, you have to meet all of the criteria. So just something to be thinking about. I think we'll finish up looking at all the proposed metrics and then come back and have that discussion.
The one thing when you look at this, and I'm not saying that this isn't something we should use, but when you're looking at this, it does not split out. This data does not split out in these groups in any way. If you take a look at that. We have a whole bunch of comprehensive universities that are higher than the doctoral. We have, it doesn't seem to split out naturally. We have some down in the masters that are higher than some that are up in their emerging research. It doesn't seem to lay out naturally like some of the others do.
You are correct. It does if you get kind of into the mid-level doctoral and go up. Well, actually, at some of the emerging research and go up. It's sort of the top-level institution.
Yeah, you have to get to the very top levels before I think it makes any distinction. Otherwise, it's kind of jumbled together.
I think you're right. So it may be something where this data is more important for the discussion going on in the emerging research and research. But I think if they're going to make a recommendation that be used, which may come from there, is it something that this group wants to consider, would think it would be important for someone to be able to show that they're increasing their endowments, and that, especially again, if we're not going to use every measure, would it be helpful for some institutions to have this measure included? Does it reflect something that they're doing that might not be reflected in the other measures that might be important in terms of which group they are included in? So there's kind of two ways to think about that. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that? That's a very good comment. Okay, well, I think that's helpful, and we'll come back to endowments and decide, given that, again, it doesn't fit very naturally, at least into the three categories that we're looking at today. Okay, next we pulled some data for students who are in the top 25% of their class. This came from the CBM OOB, what's reported to us on the B, for first-time in college students. And I thought this was interesting data also, and this is actually sorted from highest to lowest per category, which can be helpful. And we do see a little bit of jumping around here. Some of it seems to be regional, which I think is kind of interesting. You'll notice one of the definitions we have with comprehensive and masters is they talk specifically about regional aspects of those institutions, and I think this data might suggest that some institutions are doing a very good job within their regions of attracting top students. Again, that's just me looking at the data and trying to get a sense of what it's telling us. You do see some real variability. Does anyone else have any comments about what they're seeing? This is something we haven't looked at much, so it's kind of new to be looking at this. Is it what you would have expected for your institutions?
Can I ask how you saw this as matching up with what we're looking at, which is criteria for these different categories? I mean, this looks to be looking at not necessarily something that has to do with research. It looks to be looking at undergraduate students, and we have the automatic acceptance in some of these institutions that is set up there. And as you said, there's also the regional. So there seems to be lots of things in play here that may not really make that helpful, and I'm not sure how it connects up in any relevant way.
Okay, and probably those comments may carry through when we look at the next sheet, which is ACT and SAT. And these were included just to bring in something different. We were looking at all of the different metrics we had and thought, well, these are institutions that are also serving undergraduates. Would it be helpful in terms of categorizing the institutions to look at the undergraduate student body and what it looks like in terms of student preparation? Now, I'd love to get feedback from other folks on if they agree that they don't think that these two, and I hope you're okay with me combining these two together. Obviously, there's some different situations. Both of them can tie into automatic admittance. Obviously, in terms of the ACT, SAT, we have the top 10% rule, and you know, students are going to have the scores they have who are coming in under that, and those are the scores that are going to be reported. There's no control in terms of what the institution can do there. But it is another way to look at differences across institutions. Where are students choosing to go? What are they perceiving? Or does this have to do with perception? Again, these categories are included in many of our rankings that are out there. So it's certainly food for thought to think about. I'd love to get feedback from other folks, whether they think these are appropriate or whether they really aren't helpful.
Yes. Hi, this is April at A&M Texarkana. Mm-hmm. And from our standpoint, these two measures would be helpful because it gives us an indication of how well we are successfully attracting those students in our region. So I see it as very helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. And again, I think for master's institutions, it might be something that would really, again, matter more to them than maybe at the higher level. Are there other master's institutions or comprehensive institutions that have comments on this?
Is the question that you want to know if we think these metrics are useful for the grouping or useful in general? Well,
I see where you're coming from with that. We are looking at them in terms of the grouping and whether they fit in. But if we think that they are going to be helpful in terms of understanding what an institution is doing, where they fit in terms of who they are grouped with, the type of students they might be working with, and therefore if they were, for example, if we had the accountability peer groups coming in to have some kind of a discussion about student success. And we've already done that, but I'm using that as an example because it's the first one that comes to mind. If those groups were coming in to have that type of discussion, if there was some kind of categorization based on the types of students who were enrolling, that might be helpful in terms of grouping institutions appropriately. So we have a couple different things going on here. I think we have the grouping of institutions in terms of wanting like institutions that have similar students and missions and purposes, for the accountability groups, if we're going to be separating for discussion and working on projects. And then we have the groupings that have more to do with, research and what people are producing and movement across the categories, looking at those criteria. Some of which, as you get up into the higher categories, may be tied to funding, that sort of thing. So we've got kind of a couple of different things going on here. So I think you could make an argument both ways for including those, or not including these student-specific measures. This is the type of information that we have in account. If it's simply an institution is interested for comparing across other institutions, it's the type of information we have in accountability. One thing that most of you, I'm sure, are aware of, but if you're new, you might not be, is in the accountability system, you can choose to compare institutions just in one of the accountability groups. So if we have them grouped well, it's a quick and easy way to say, I want to see what other institutions that are similar to me are doing in terms of this or that accountability metric. So you simply can go into the accountability system and select comprehensive institutions and get the information for those institutions. So there's also value, I think, in having them grouped, especially if you're thinking about masters in comprehensive, by the types of students who might be enrolling, thinking about undergraduates, because they're going to be grouped together as someone goes in to look into the system.
This is Karen from SFA.
Yes. Hi, Karen.
Hi. My opinion would be that I believe the information about the ACT and top admission status is helpful context for institutions, ours, and I would expect others. Mm-hmm. But my personal opinion would be that I don't feel like it's a grouping criteria that should be part of the mechanism used to determine who goes into what group. But I do think it's useful context.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I agree that it's nice to have, but I think you're going to run into the same problem here that as the earlier measure. There are no breaks in here except until you get to the higher end of the emerging research. I mean, 530. I mean, you have masters that are higher than the comprehensive. You have comprehensives higher than the doctoral. Masters higher than the doctoral. So I don't see any. It's going to be very difficult to categorize based on this.
And obviously, we're not privy to the conversation going on with emerging research. It would be interesting to know if they are having the same response. It does bring the discussion to undergraduates versus the other categories that are involved in a lot of what we're looking at in terms of the metrics. Where we're mostly looking at doctoral education. So, okay, well, that's helpful. Do we want to make any more specific? Sorry. Go ahead.
Would there be any statewide averages for this indicator?
Well, we've got for the top 25%, we've got the statewide 52.9 at the bottom of the worksheet we sent out. You see that there? I hope it got into what we sent.
These data would be very helpful to us.
Okay, and where are you calling from, please?
University of Houston, Clear Lake, and since we're going to enroll students fall of 14 undergrads, this type of information would be very helpful.
Now, one thing we can talk about, because I don't believe, now correct me if I'm wrong, Gabriella, because I don't know the accountability system by heart yet. I'm getting close, but we don't show this measure in the accountability system. Is that correct? This might be something, as I'm hearing people talk about the fact that they like this might be something we would consider including as an accountability measure. Whether or not we decide to include it in terms of the categories. What do folks think about that? Just just because, you know, that's part of what the discussion will be about this afternoon, so it'd be nice to get some feedback. I'm seeing some heads nod, and folks in the field think it might be useful there. Okay, well, I'm sensing that it would certainly be helpful to have there, and I think, you know, I will bring back your feedback on these measures. I'm seeing the majority of folks saying they don't think they're useful in terms of categorizing the groups, but they do think it's useful information to provide. But with some exceptions, and I'll make sure I note that there are some exceptions to that, and there are some folks who think they should be included.
And how important is SAT and ACT scores for you?
Yeah.
For your groups?
Would you all say same discussion?
It's along the same lines as what the lady on the phone was saying, is that it's good information to have to be able to compare ourselves within our category, but as far as using that information to put us into a category, it's the same thing.
And how important is for admissions?
Those scores to us, I mean, they're very important when we're considering admission of students, but and that's what I'm saying, to be able to compare within our category, but placing into a category, I don't.
Yeah, I think we're seeing something similar where at the very top of the list we're seeing some differentiation, but then there's a lot of overlap. I will note for those of you who aren't aware that this data is provided in the Higher Education Almanac. It's not provided this way. We actually have the ranges, so we have the bottom 25th to the top 75th, so the middle 50th percentile is shown. But I removed the bottom 25th. We decided that this would be a more appropriate way to show it for this discussion. Now, what do folks think about that in terms of how we've shown it for this discussion? If someone does decide it should be appropriate, decide to put this forward, if the other group talks about it, do you like the 75th percentile? Do you think that's an appropriate way to look at it if we're trying to differentiate groups as opposed to a range? It would be hard, I think, for this purpose, because you'd be saying your range should be this or that, as opposed to you should be aiming for, or the group should have, you know, such and such a 75th percentile for ACT, SAT. Okay, so it seems like you're okay with the way it's done, but you disagree that it even belongs here. Correct? Okay. Well, I'm glad we brought these forward so we could have that discussion. Anything we haven't thought about that we should consider including? Anything that isn't here that you think is really obviously missing?
One of the things that's in all the definitions is whether it's a regional or whether it's offering things to people outside of the region and the state. And so I just wondered if information on that makes any difference. I'm not sure. I haven't looked at any of the information to see if it would distinguish, but did we want to look at, are the doctoral programs serving a regional? Are they serving, you know, a broader area of students? I don't know. I don't know if that makes any difference at all, but I just noticed it is in every single one of the definitions.
I think that's an excellent point. You know, we have a lot of regional data about student enrollment and how many students are enrolling from within a region or outside of a region. We haven't specifically looked at doctoral enrollment regionally, and that's an interesting question because that's not something we've looked at. So it's something we could produce. You know, we do have a sense of what institutions are more regional in terms of where their undergraduates are coming from.
And that may make no difference, but I just thought that since it's in the definitions, might be something we look at and see if it's something that would be useful.
So are you suggesting enrollment based of the regional residence of the student? Because I'm thinking of all these online doctoral programs that are going on that may fit into other regions, not necessarily your region.
The other thing that seems to happen when you look at the regional data is there's some regions where I think because of just the geographic makeup of the state, some regions, like our West Texas region, we see very little movement of students, whether it's at the community college or the 4-year level or beyond that. Students seem to stay put, where there are regions where there's a lot of movement that isn't maybe necessarily tied to the institution, but just tied to the fact that students seem to find it easier to cross regional borders, and that could have to do with a lot of different things. But just like we were looking at some of the data for the Valley and West Texas, you don't see as much movement there. Up in the Panhandle, sometimes we don't see as much student movement as we see, especially when you get into Central Texas and Houston, Dallas areas. So it's a challenge because you don't want to necessarily be assuming things. But I think the language in here about regional institutions, because I think institutions do have an understanding about whether they're, generally serving students from their regions or beyond. I think that's probably important to include, and I think it probably would be helpful to pull some data for that. We can leave it open to whether we need an actual metric and number, a percent of students, because I'm afraid
I don't
that
know
might
if it's
be
going to be that something we can pin down that much. The other is that I think that's been brought up is faculty productivity, research productivity.
Okay.
And I don't think that we have any, and I don't know if we would even have a metric on that we could do, but I do know that that's something that Carnegie tries to look at as well.
Yeah, we have looked at faculty productivity, and it's a real challenge, which you're probably all aware of. And I would be happy to raise that and mention that in terms of what we'd actually use for a metric. I think that would be the challenge, and but I'll mention it because I think it's important that,
Let's keep in mind, if we don't have that information, you are supposed to provide it.
Yeah. and coming to consensus on how it should be done could also be a real challenge, based on some of the things we've seen or that we've tried to do. You can tweak it. It doesn't take much to shift it into some different directions, and what the weighting of research should be and all of that. There's a lot of components to that I think would probably need to be sorted out. But we will definitely put forth in our recommendations the suggested elements that we hadn't included. Is there anything else that we should be thinking about?
I want a clarification here. Faculty productivity for all these groups?
I would like to see a faculty FTE by rubric using the CBM-8. That's something we've been requested of a lot lately, and I know we offer a faculty FTE, and I understand the calculation from Paul Turcotte, but if we could get that at a more detailed level, I think that would provide us with more faculty productivity information, at least for our institution.
What grouping you are referring to?
I'm talking about by course rubric. For example, literature would be LITR, and, break it out by that grouping, which we are able to do using the CB8, but it would be nice to have comparative information, to the other master's level institutions, and also provide trend data.
This sounds like something that might be appropriate for our discussion of what we might think about including in the accountability system. The one thing we do have to keep in mind, of course, is we're trying to keep the number of measures constant and not add unless we subtract, so that we don't have a monster on our hands.
Yeah, I understand that.
But it also is, one thing I mentioned early on in the meeting, if some of you weren't here, I know Gabriella, I think, might not have heard this, but that we are working on coming up with a table or some kind of rubric that explains how we do full-time student equivalent and full-time faculty equivalent, and some of the different ways we use those for the different measures that we have in accountability and in the almanac. And it might be something where we could think about also producing something by program areas or by courses.
Yes, y'all recently, provided me, Diane did, with some very detailed information on that, and I really appreciate it because I was able to calculate the same measure, but there's a million different ways to do that, and that's what we have found here, that there's the common data set method and just so many multiple ways to calculate a student-faculty ratio. So it really helped to be able to get the information actually from, I think it was Kathy Cox that provided.
Yes.
So that was very helpful.
Well, I'm glad, and it's actually what we did for you, and building on it is what we want to take and put online, because we do get a lot of institutions asking questions about how it's done. And as the data becomes more and more visible, I think, and I guess you could argue more and more important, especially with some of our outcomes-based funding and different things coming along, it's going to be important for institutions to be able to understand how we've calculated measures, and in cases where it's possible for them to do so, to try to replicate that calculation. And so, and to be honest, that was for me, for my first year working in the accountability system, it was the most confusing thing for me to try to sort out. It didn't help that Janice McKeever, who's the person who ran all of those for years and years and years, retired last spring when Janet did. But because of my own confusion and the questions we got from institutions, we decided that really should be a top priority to put that out there. So we will do that. In terms of, to bring us back to our accountability group categories, I'm trying to think of how we could tie something in with faculty FTE, or any, beyond anything we want to think about with faculty here. Obviously there's some things that are part of NRUF, like the faculty awards, all that we haven't included and probably wouldn't be appropriate. But is there anything else, any other comments about how faculty might be included?
And remember, we need to, I don't want to call it targets, but if you include anything regarding faculty FTE, say so many FTEs or whatever for this group and the other group, and how you deal with that one, not just putting their faculty FTE of some kind. So keep in mind that.
Okay.
However, probably faculty productivity that was suggested by Candy may reflect your mission, because not everybody has a mission of having faculty doing research. I mean, teaching is a very good mission. So maybe I'm thinking CBM 8 or iPads that you report, how many are these categories, how the percentage of faculty in one category of the other. I don't know, but it may be tied with the mission. How to tie it to the mission, how that measure should look like, can be up for discussion.
Okay. I want to just go back briefly to talk about the regional needs, unless there's any other comments about faculty. Okay. Since it was raised, we talk about particular regional needs in the comprehensive university discussion. We talk about regional need in terms of the doctoral institutions. Again, if you look at on the second page, the second paragraph under doctoral institutions, doctoral universities offer a wide range of excellent baccalaureate and master's programs and are committed to graduate education through the doctorate in targeted areas of excellence and or regional need. So we're talking about regional need for doctoral programs. We're not talking about it in terms of undergraduate. Do we think those should still be included in these two definitions in the way that they are? And should we be talking about should we be including anything for the master's institution about a regional mission? Okay, we're right here. What's this handout? So we're looking at the handout with the current group categories.
When we say comprehensive, it's focusing on serving the student population within the region. It's not quite the same thing, serving the region needs, in terms of programs. So think about that too.
It does seem to be targeting regional need, though. I think there's definitely, in terms of the language that we have here now, which is interesting, but you also are looking at national programs. Oh, okay. Oh, here we go. Thank you. Gabriella pointed out the last bullet under comprehensive universities. We also talk about serving the student population within the region. And that's something that, maybe we want to talk about, have a bullet like that, and maybe I've missed it in terms of the master's institutions. I was just looking through the master's language quickly and seeing if we talk about a regional focus there, and we don't seem to. So is that something that should be carried over? Is that something that really belongs with the comprehensive and master's in terms of undergraduate, and then in terms of the doctoral program, the regional focus belongs with the doctoral and comprehensive in terms of targeting regional needs? And thinking about it certainly in terms of our education doctorate, some of the specific programs that we see at our comprehensive universities or our doctoral universities, it's because there's a regional need for that program. And then you could also bring up the example Paul made of the marine science at Corpus, which is a very national, it's a program that's nationally recognized, but it's a very it's one of a few at that institution. Maybe I'm thinking about Lamar's program for their deaf studies program. I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact name of that program that's nationally known. That really is, that's something, that's the piece that we have in the doctoral definition, that they may be providing a program that is nationally recognized, it's very specialized, and then in addition to that, they're meeting regional need with doctoral programs. Does it make sense to keep that language the way it is, what we have now, or would that be the case with comprehensive institutions, that they would have some national programs? It actually says there could be one or two recognized nationally. So that's kind of how we've seen it in terms of the doctoral programs. Not a comprehensive offering, but specific offerings for regional need or something that's nationally recognized, that's developed. Sam Houston State with the criminal justice program. I think we see a lot of that. It's one of the things that our doctoral and comprehensive universities do really well, is to really focus in on an area where they of excellence and maintain their national reputation.
Julie, this is Karen.
Yes.
My comment about the language regarding regional is that I feel like the way it's stated, at least I think we're talking about the two bullets or the bullets in the comprehensive definition.
Yes.
To me, the first and last bullets cover the regional emphasis without being specific, but to me it's adequate. But other people may have a different opinion, but I think it appropriately addresses the the desired need for regional emphasis with the first and last bullet.
Okay. And that's for the comprehensive, correct?
Should we have the same thing for master degree?
I was kind of raising it because it's not there for master's degrees.
Yeah. None of those two bullets that Karen was talking about.
Right. We talk about broad-based undergraduate education as opposed to access to a broad range of excellent baccalaureate and master's programs. We saw when we were looking at the data and especially looking at the definitions of comprehensive and master's, we saw a lot of overlap. We have master's institutions now that have a doctoral program or two. We were thinking about is it appropriate to have that division? Maybe yes, maybe no. Any thoughts? In terms of sheer number, then it makes for a very large group. Anyway, I think probably everyone's had a chance to give us their feedback, their comments on the measures we've shown you and any possible additions. If there are no additional comments related to that, why don't we move into some of the issues I raised earlier, like whether we want to have which categories we want to include, whether we want to be thinking about doing any combinations, which metrics we don't think are appropriate. Though I think I have a pretty good sense of that from our discussion. But let's see if we can get some specificity on those things now, so we can bring forward those recommendations. So I think maybe tackling them one at a time for the levels that we do decide to include. And again, this is a recommendation that will be made to the commissioner. So it could be there'll be some decisions made about levels that are based on the recommendations, and it could be that there'll be some decisions that are based on his looking at it comprehensively with the recommendations that come from the emerging research and the research group. So in terms of metrics where it's a very concrete benchmark that's being included, not provide good regional education, but, produce this many PhDs per year. Do we think it's appropriate to set a number of years, or to come up with some kind of a time frame for how long institutions would have to maintain a level before they could be considered in terms of changing categories? Or is it if you hit those benchmarks that are included, then you belong in that category if you hit them for 1 year?
Do we have any idea if there are institutions that have moved up only to then fall below that, and then all of a sudden they're up where they don't belong?
Right now, the only movement we've seen is Texas State University at St. Marcus has moved.
And Corpus Christi.
Okay. Texas State, and thank you. This is why we need the history. Texas State University moved up to the emerging research, and Corpus moved from comprehensive to doctoral. Is that correct?
We think we were sort of.
Okay. Did that happen fairly early on? Was that a while ago? Okay, I apologize. I wasn't aware of that. So we have had 2 institutions move up. We haven't had any institutions drop down a category. And in speaking with Susan Brown before the meeting, she wanted to reiterate what I said to all of you, that this is not about trying to move people out of their existing categories. It's just for moving forward. So if your institution is in a category and feels strongly about being in that category, the discussion we were having was that it would be, we'll keep the categories where they are. However, this would, for institutions that want to move categories, we thought it was important to update the criteria. That makes sense. So now there might be an institution that has changed their mission and feels strongly that they should drop down a category, and we certainly wouldn't say no, you have to remain where you are. That has not happened to this point, but could happen. Okay.
I was just wondering if that was part of the idea behind having the time frame limitation, that there were any that were sort of bouncing back and forth, which I wouldn't visualize that to be happening, because once you've, just the sheer amount of time that you have to spend in the process of increasing, I don't know, in my personal opinion, I think that time frame that it takes to implement, that one more program would kind of be your time frame, so to speak. So,
however, with the program review, you can implement it and then, to be low producing. So you can look at either way.
I think I agree back here too that there doesn't seem to be such huge fluctuation that becomes a problem. And so I don't understand. I'm not sure what would be the purpose of having a arbitrary time limit put in there. There doesn't seem to be this wild fluctuation. There doesn't seem to be an issue of that happening before. So it would seem to be something that would just be arbitrary. We'd just be picking a number and saying, okay, let's do this, but for no actual reason with data.
Okay. What I'm hearing is a recommendation that once an institution reaches the criteria to move, that would be, then that institution would have the opportunity to move up. Okay.
Julie, this is Pinder from UHV again.
Yes.
I think you referred to this idea earlier, but I just want to clarify for myself. Are we talking about a university moving categories based simply on meeting one of the criteria, or a majority, or?
Well, that's the other discussion, is that we came to you with 7 possible metrics that could be used as part of a criteria. There were 2 that everyone, or I shouldn't say everyone, that the majority felt shouldn't be part of the criteria discussion. So that leaves us with 5, the way I see it. And I think everyone would agree that we have 5. Would the recommendation from this group be that an institution would have to meet 4 of the 5, or 3 of the 5 for 3 years? And the other thing is, if we say you have to meet all of them, then not having a time period built in where the maintenance has to be there, it probably makes some sense. If we're saying an institution has to reach 3 of the 5, would it make more sense to build in a time period? Should it be 4 of the 5? Any suggestions there, or should?
Well, what have we based it on before? I mean, how did we end up with these groupings? Was it through meeting all
Yes.
5?
And we're hoping when Susan joins it, I think, in fact, she has to go to the legislature after lunch, unfortunately, but I'll ask her as soon as we break, and we do need to try to wind up the conversation in the next 5 or 10 minutes if we can, and if we do have some time after lunch, we can pick it up. But these are the criteria that were decided in 2004, and in my sense, in looking at the data now, there might have been a little flexibility for including categories. But in terms of the concrete numbers, Paul, was it your sense that the institutions had to have met those concrete numbers? And I'm putting him on the spot. Okay, so in terms of the actual benchmark numbers that are in here, the institutions were to have met, but some of the general language about serving regional needs and, generally having 1 or 2 programs of excellence, that I think there was a little more wiggle room around that, because that is less concrete. So I think we want to move towards something that's clear. If we're using a metric, if we're setting a standard and saying an institution has to reach this standard in terms of PhD programs or restricted research or endowment, then I think we need to make a clear-cut decision and not say, we should eyeball it and determine if they fit or not. I think it needs to be clear. If an institution reaches this level, then the institution can move up to the next category. Does that make sense? So it's clear and not. Otherwise, I think it could be very fuzzy. Yeah, go ahead.
So wherever we have concrete demarcations, we have to meet those criteria to belong into a certain category. But where we don't have a concrete demarcation, we don't.
Well, I think that if you look at, for example, master's universities, we wanted to include a description of who would be in that category, but we do not have concrete demarcations there. And for comprehensive, again, there's very little that's concrete. So it's a discussion that's challenging, because we don't want to leave those institutions out and just say, here's the concrete categories, and then everybody else is just lumped together. We wanted to try to define who is in these groups, but when we do use the concrete definitions, especially moving forward, we thought it was important that institutions reach those. And now, if the suggestion is that not be the case, we can certainly make that suggestion.
And plus, another point that Julie suggested for discussion was to combine comprehensive and master's groups together. So the descriptions are more vague, but all of a sudden, if you combine them, it's not so unclear who belongs to this combined group.
Right. Then you've pretty much got 2 categories where you're not using concrete metrics to say you have to reach these categories to move forward. And again, some of it has to do with the purpose of the categories, what they're used for. I was told some of the discussions in these 2 different groups were very different when they were working on projects. Well, let's again, I want to be able to come out of the meeting with speaking of concrete information, with some concrete recommendations to move forward with. So we've talked about the levels, and that everyone feels like that's not they feel like if someone reaches the criteria, then they should be able to move to the next level. In terms of choosing from these criteria, I think the consensus is that the 5 criteria that are basically related to research and doctoral education and funding, those are the endowments, those are the criteria folks want to include, and they're okay with the 5 that we've brought forth. And in terms of the other suggestions, I think they were good suggestions, but I didn't hear anything strongly expressed there. Yes, we have a comment.
I'm not sure if this is on. This is Dwayne Snyder. I'm from Tarleton. We don't yet have a dog in the fight, but the notion of dollars spent on research rather than simply counting the number of different kinds of degrees seems to be a more reasonable approach in the long run.
Okay, so just to use that one. Now, what do you think about just suggesting that an institution has to meet 3 of the 5 or 4 of the 5 levels that are set? Would that help to answer your question? Or do you think it's better to bring it back down to just 3 measures? You need to meet those 3 and keep it to endowments and restricted research. And I'm trying to think what the other would be.
We're far enough away from those boundaries that I'm not sure I've thought carefully about that.
Right.
And so I'd restrict it to just my one statement that in terms of dollars spent on research, just seems to be a better long-range measure than counting number of different kinds of degrees does.
Okay. I think in that context, the 3 of 5 makes good sense, because you may have, we referred earlier to institutions that have very focused concentration in a certain area where they're exceedingly excellent in comparison, and so they may only have that may be the one doctoral or PhD program that they have that just really exceeds all others in the amount of money that goes into it. Right. There's a lot being done in that one area, and so it may put them over the mark in that case but that they may not meet the number of degrees. So I think maybe there, in that context, is where that 3 of 5 would be useful.
And I want to remind you that historically we did not move anybody just moving. You had to ask us, asking to be moved. So it's not like automatically somebody will be moved. You need to want to be moved.
Right. Okay, and I'm thinking, sorry. Okay, so what we've got is restricted research expenditures, PhD award count, program count, and head count doctoral enrollment. Okay, so do people agree with 3 of 5? Are we hearing some consensus there again to put recommendation forward? It looks to me like emerging research has broken. Yes, they're just coming through. So we want to go ahead and finish up. The only other thing I wanted to bring up, we talked about adjusting for inflation. And for these groups, my sense might be that we could make a recommendation that the accountability groups look at the measures every 2 years, rather than say it should be adjusted this much. Given the data we were looking at, where for some measures we saw very little movement and for others we saw quite a bit over time, would it make sense for an inflation adjustment to make that type of recommendation based on the type of data we were seeing? Because we were coming back to let's stay where we are for several of these based on looking at the data. So does that resonate with the audience? Yeah, because to me, really what we're seeing is it's not an obvious, wow, everyone is doing so much better in these categories, they don't fit at all. Many of them still fit. Okay, so I think we've gone through all of the metrics. We've talked about the issues we wanted to raise. Are there any final comments from the group, any final suggestions in terms of making recommendations? Okay, what I would like to do then is to put something together and forward it out to everyone so that you can see, just to have something in writing, hey, this is what we discussed, this is what the recommendations are, just to make sure that I'm characterizing the discussion correctly, to give you one last chance to say, this really isn't what I meant, or I didn't sense that we had a group consensus on that. Would that be acceptable to everyone. So I'll need to do that very quickly. So hopefully I'll get something to you by the end of the week or beginning of next week at the latest. Thank you all very, very much for helping and participating in the discussion. It was really, I think, a fruitful discussion, and we appreciate your time. Now we're going to be moving to lunch. I believe the meals should be right in the outside corridor. If you ordered one, please be sure to pay Sue if you have not already. I know she was collecting money for the lunches. We're going to break until 1. We do have Luby's just a little ways down the street if you would like to go and get lunch there. And we have a break room here that does have snacks. It has some sandwiches, usually not too many, which is why we did want to order something in. So there, again, we'll break for lunch and we'll come back together at 1. And feel free to seek me out if you want to make any comments related to the discussion. Thank you. This morning, we did mention that there's information that I mentioned that there are several spreadsheets that we have now placed online that connect the data from sources and uses to the data in the accountability system and the almanac. I think it adds a little more transparency about where certain numbers come from. And we've included a link to that data in the accountability system. Put my glasses on. I think it's measure, let's see, is it 48, measure 48. So there is a link there. You'll be able to reach those files that we discussed. And hopefully that will be helpful. And while we're discussing that, this morning in the meeting with the Doctoral Comprehensive and Master's Group, we talked a little bit about the restricted research expenditures and what institutions are reporting to us in those categories, and the fact that institutions sometimes have a difficult time understanding what the broad definition is supposed to include, and also what other institutions are reporting in those categories, how they are interpreting the definitions that we provide. So, Gary, would this be a good time while we're waiting for Jose for you to just talk a little bit about how that's done?
Yeah, is this on? Okay. What I've put up here is this is the definitions that are in sources and uses, which the financial officers from the institutions get. And I just wanted to show you at least how broad the definition is that they're provided when they complete their financial reports. And it's really any organized activity specifically to produce research outcomes. And this could be expenses that are funded internally, externally, and they must be separately budgeted. So as I was talking to Julie, we probably, if you talk to your budget staff, they may be able to give you, at least for your institution, what activities they're budgeting under research operating activities and which ones are going into other activities. Is your button pushed on your mic?
I'm sorry, my microphone is not on. You couldn't hear anything? I apologize. My microphone was not on. So and for those of you who are at home, I apologize. So we thought it might be helpful to at the next accountability meeting to have institutions meet with their with their financial officers and bring a list of what they're reporting through sources and uses for the restricted research expenditures, so that groups could, so that institutions could compare and see if what they're reporting is in line with what other institutions are reporting, so that we can have some consistency there. Okay, and I think and we're going to, since Jose is not back yet and Susan's not here, unless I have a volunteer from the Emerging Research Group who would like to summarize the work you did this morning. Do we have a volunteer? Because I guess if we don't, then we'll go ahead and wait. I think hopefully folks will remember the discussions, and Jose and I will summarize the work done in the two different groups and talk a little bit about some commonalities and some differences between what the groups came up with for recommendations. And I think that will be helpful. There might be some ideas that we want to introduce to the other group and see if they think that makes some sense. Some ideas that would pertain to all of the different categories and not just the categories that were under discussion in the breakout meetings. So again, thank you all. It sounds like there were rich discussions in both rooms, and we appreciate you being part of that. Okay, so next on the agenda is the legislative update. Susan Brown was going to be here to do this, but she got called to the legislature. She found out late yesterday evening. So I'm going to go through and talk a little bit about some of the coordinating board's legislative priorities. And she thought it was important for us to get some...
I'm sorry, could we have the camera on the speaker?
Oh, okay. Can someone put the camera on the speaker, please? Who's ever handling that? Okay, is the camera on the PowerPoint now?
No, the camera is on. I'm sorry, I don't know her name.
On Gabriella the whole time.
Okay.
Gabriella?
We have been watching you very closely, Gabriella.
She could lip sync.
The camera is on the speaker.
That's okay. All right, I'm on camera now. Great. Okay, so we're going to...
the camera is still on Gabriella.
Still on Gabriella.
Yeah.
Why don't you sit here?
I could just move. Yeah, that might solve the problem. And then they'll change it. I'm actually getting ready to move over to... Hi, I'm getting ready to move over to forward my PowerPoint unless Gary wants to help with that. But as I was saying, Susan is not here to do the legislative update. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the coordinating board legislative priorities. But she did want me to ask all of you if you had any comments about current legislation. She specifically wanted to know if you had any thoughts on the legislation related to changing the high school curriculum. I know there's some different bills out there that involve making a change to the 4x4. Are there? And I believe there was someone from a university who testified in favor of one of those bills. So she just wanted to get a sense from all of you if you have any thoughts about those bills that do affect the high school curriculum. Yes. Carlton. Thank you. Anyone else concur with that thought or disagree? Or?
I hate to be a stickler, but the ones on the phone, didn't get any of that. It was just silent.
Okay. He's going to
I'm going to try it with the microphone because we would like to see the plan that's been put in place over the last 8 years and implemented to get us to where we are in terms of the high school requirements, that they would leave that alone.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay.
What is your PowerPoint?
Okay, the PowerPoint should say Coordinating Board Update, and it should be right on the desktop. And then we were talking a little at lunch, is there any other legislation that folks are feeling strongly in favor of or opposed to, or that they feel comfortable commenting on in this setting. I know there might be some things that you'd prefer to save for after the meeting, but if there is anything that you'd like to comment on, we're happy to hear your thoughts. There are some reporting bills. We were just talking about the fact that there are some that seem to include some duplication of things that we're already doing. So we'll be tracking those from my office to see what happens with those. But of course, there's a lot of additional legislation as well. Okay, well, let me talk a little bit about the Coordinating Board legislative priorities. And I've taken some of these slides, and again, please bear with me since Susan was going to be doing this presentation, but I've taken some of these slides from other presentations that have been done from the Coordinating Board. One legislative priority, of course, has to do with financial aid, and usually if you look at the Coordinating Board list of legislative priorities, financial aid is on the top of the list, ensuring that we get as much aid as possible to our students. You'll see Texas must share responsibility for financial aid among federal government, the state, and the institutions. And this talks about the Coordinating Board proposal for financial aid to serve more students with grant aid, to expand the pathway for community college transfer, to improve flexibility for financial aid offices to serve the students they deem appropriate, and to increase funding to expand the program. And it talks about adding the additional monies there. Next slide talks about credit accumulation and time to degree. And I think perhaps James will be able to address this. James Goman will be able to address this. Would you like to address it, Gabriela? We'll talk about this for a moment.
What this is about is the report. Probably everybody saw the timely graduation report, and you have the same measure in Almanac. The students accumulate too many hours, and you know that by law, they have to have a bachelor degree will have to have 120 hours. There is an excess of 27 more credits that, on average, students take at this point. So you can imagine if it's an average of 147, we have students with 180 or 190 hours. So what we want to do is propose a decrease in the number of allowable hours for which the state will reimburse the institution. Right now it's 120 plus another 30, so 35. The commissioner would like to see that decrease, so it will be up to 135 hours to be reimbursed. Everything over that would be out of state tuition.
Can I mention something on that? With this kind of proposal, this hits the four-year institutions all the time, even if the excess of hours were taken at the community college before they transferred. So those of us who have a lot of transfer students have somebody coming in with lots of hours sometimes. I know. But in the end, it's us who punish the student and us who don't get the income.
And if you go next slide, another proposal is for the associate degrees. Right now, there is no limit on associate degrees. Another proposal is to have an associate degrees of 60 credits. So that will limit some of the hours that will be taken by community college students. Right now, their average is about 90 hours. So there are a lot of hours taken in community colleges. Both of these numbers don't include developmental ed, by the way. So those numbers, also the dual credits, are not included in those calculations. So,
and I was going to add, for the first time in our almanac, and we've made a note of it in the almanac definitions, for the first time in the 2013 almanac, we have left dual credit out of the calculations for the hours to degree, the SCHs. to degree.
And also, these are attempted hours.
Yes.
So the hope is that we'll cut into retaking the class, dropping the classes, and so forth. So these are not completed hours.
But is that going to be the same as it's set up now with over 30 hours, which you're talking about making over 15, that if they go beyond 60 hours at the community college, they won't get funding for the community colleges for that?
Yes.
Is that how that's going to work?
That's the
way?
hope now, That's a proposal.
Right, and I think most of you are aware now that dual majors and degrees would have higher thresholds, and we do now have that additional item in the CBM report where we're able to collect information about second degrees that students earn.
And again,
Kevin has something to
and I want to specify something too. These numbers don't include students that had previously another bachelor degrees. So everything that, and also in the proposal, those degrees that require, like engineering or other, that require more than 120 are not included. So those longer programs will still be longer programs, but the regular 120.
And the time to degree and credits to degree, those are metrics that Gabriella runs, and when you received your almanac, the preliminary almanac files that you were all very kind to review for us, that information is in there, and that will be published in the almanac. And Kevin Lemoyne from UT Systems wanted to add something.
I just want to say, I think the proposal to reduce the number of excess hours is a little premature, because the legislation that was passed several years ago limiting baccalaureate degree programs to 120 hours unless there's a compelling academic reason to do so, we won't feel the full effect of that until the next year or two. Is that right, Catherine? I think it was it became effective fall 2008, if I'm not mistaken. Many institutions, I mean all institutions, reduced the number of semester credit hour requirements for baccalaureate degree programs at that time based on that legislation. I think we really need to see how many semester credit hours students are accumulating who started in those degree programs in fall 2008 before making these kinds of legislative recommendations.
Well, what I can tell you at this point is that we looked what happened with this decrease of excess credits before and after this plus 35. It was a legislation 2006 or something that limited some number of hours, and it dropped. After that legislation was implemented, it dropped the average numbers. So it seems that if students find out they have to pay more, they are more careful. So I think the implementation of 120 was the next step. Okay, the students should do their part, the institutions should do their part, and now again the students should do their part too. So, but since 2000, you could see the point where some legislation was implemented and it went down.
Could I add just a comment? I agree with what Kevin is saying. And I think it's really important when there are several different initiatives underway at the same time. The initiative to limit baccalaureate semester credit hours and the initiative to limit student enrollment through denying funding to institutions and allowing the institutions to increase tuition up to non-resident levels. Those things have been going on at the same time, and I think it's very difficult to make a general assumption that one or the other of those is solely responsible for an outcome if we're not taking into account the efforts that coordinating board staff have made over the last few years to really encourage institutions to take a long, hard look at the credit hours they require, and also for these kinds of values to be communicated effectively and to become part of the culture in high schools across the state so that students are planning more effectively. And I would agree with what Kevin says, that this is premature. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I'm saying this might be a little too early.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments?
Yes, I had one question.
Yes.
I wasn't clear how you all were capturing second majors. On what report is that showing up on?
No, we're capturing second degrees if a student earns more than one degree.
Okay, and so how...
And that's on the CBM 009.
Right.
It's the very last item.
So in other words, if we'll look back 10 years. If during those 10 years a student earned another bachelor degree, that student is not included in the calculation.
Well, and actually I was bringing
But if it's in the same year, then yes,
Right.
the student is.
Dual majors and degrees requiring more hours would have higher thresholds. I was responding to that statement, which is part of the proposal. If we go back a few slides to where it says 30 and 15 hours. So just an understanding that some students are dual major students or who are trying to earn 2 degrees at the same time.
And so how do we...
Double degrees. So we do have, and I can pull up that item on the 009 if you
no,
like.
I know which one that is.
And probably it's up to you to determine those things when all is said and done.
Yeah.
Because I'm unclear in that if a dual, the limit on the semester credit hours is captured on CBM 1 when we report their hours are currently enrolled in.
Yes.
So how do I identify to you that they are actually pursuing 2 majors?
We start with the graduates. So these numbers are based on the graduates of this, a certain year looking back. So at the time of graduation, whatever you report to us.
So that's capturing the information of those who have graduated.
Yes.
So someone who is a double major, we have no way of telling you that until they graduate?
It's up to the institution, I believe, to keep track of the hours in terms of what the student.
Okay.
Yeah, is that what you're getting at?
There's a field where you put the number of hours in the student's degree, so that if a student has a double major, then you put the number of hours.
Okay. Through that.
Instead of submitting the number of hours for 1 degree.
Okay.
Thank you. And there will need to be some details ironed out if this goes through, and some rules, and I think we'll need to get into the details of reporting. Yes.
One of the things I would encourage, particularly if you go. One of the things I would encourage in terms of if you go towards the 15 hours beyond the degree, is to really think about a long phase-in period, because there are students coming into the university with 90 plus hours from community colleges. So there would be no way for them to be able to finish their baccalaureate degrees, at the institution. So if you just cut off funding at 15 hours, then it gives the universities 2 choices. We can start, doubling tuition and fees for seniors that are, getting ready to graduate, which won't go over very much, or we can just sort of eat the cost ourselves. So basically, you would be cutting our funding for things that are really not within our control. And it's really the truth that most of the students that are out there with large number of hours, they're out there. So are we going to go to a system where we basically deny admission to students because they have a lot of hours from community colleges?
And I just wonder if this works on the same sense of what Paul's talking about. Does this work up against trying to meet the other goal of trying to get all those people out there who are non-completers, right? Because if we bring those back in, most of them will have extra hours. And we're going to end up having a problem. And so, again, it really works against that other goal of getting those non-completers back in the system to get degrees.
The thing is, these are very good comments, and we'll put them forward. But I think in terms of implementation, it may not be us. I mean, there may be the legislators who will decide that.
Hopefully, you will caution them not to be too precipitous in what they do.
We'll try. Thank you. Any other comments on those 3 legislative priorities?
Yes, this is Peggy Johnson from UH Clear Lake, and I wanted to find out if Gabriella, she had mentioned that some of the unfunded hour averages had decreased. Is there any type of documentation or anything on the accountability site where we could get that? Because our budget department actually was trying to project what our unfunded hours would be as they do their budget.
No. We are not talking about unfunded hours. We are not talking about those. What I was talking about was the average number of hours that the students took.
Okay, well, that would help,
those were the attempted hours that you reported, and usually those are funded hours.
Yeah, the timely graduation reports, which are available online, and they used to be required in statute, and that statute went away, but we were asked by the institutions to continue to produce that data. So we have updated that data, and it is available on the website under timely graduation reports. And again, in the almanac, we just have the most recent year of data.
So you have those numbers, but those are funded hours.
Okay.
And if you look at those reports, you can see the totals for your institution, but also by areas of studies. So you can see a group of majors compared with other groups of majors, how those average SEH look like.
And we have the SEH degree, and then we have the time to degree.
And the methodology, I think, changed. I didn't run it at that time, but I think before 2005, or in 2005, they included developmental ed hours, and then they switched and only credit hours, college level hours after. And then now in 2012, we also removed the dual credits.
And I will add to that we run data for all of the institutions for Complete College America, and they asked us this year to include the developmental education.
And plus the Complete College America, if you look at those numbers, they are completed hours. They are not attempted hours.
Yes, so everyone does this a little bit differently. So please be aware of that if you see Complete College America reports out there talking about time to degree, that they have asked us beginning this year to include developmental hours, and it is completed hours that we do for them. The importance of reading definitions, which you all are understand that. Okay, anything else? Thank you. Well, we're going to move on to another legislative priority, which is outcomes-based funding, and Gary Johnstone is going to walk you through that. And I think he has a separate PowerPoint. And I apologize, Gary, we left one slide on there for the TSTCs by mistake related to their outcomes-based funding.
We can tell you about that, too, if you are interested.
Oh, I wasn't on. Sorry about that. Okay. This proposal made by the coordinating board is exactly what came from the Formula Advisory Committee, which was made up of institutional representatives, presidents, and provosts and financial officers primarily were on that committee. I'll start off with this pie chart here. This is just to let you know, based on the if whatever the funding amount is for outcomes funding, we don't know what that'll be, but based on the funding allocation among the metrics, the factors that are being measured for 2009, 10, and 11 academic years, this is how the distribution of funds would have been to the institutions. I do want to let you know, I mean, the basis for this is total undergraduate degrees. And so you see that part of the pie is probably 18-20%. And then the darker portion of this circle are all related to that total undergraduate degrees. Then there's the lighter portion of this pie, which is measuring persistence. And the way we measure persistence is that in any 1 year, a student at your institution completes 30, 60, or 90 hours. When they cross that threshold, then that becomes a point in this accumulation of points that we're doing here. So that's the part that's not related to degrees. The darker portion of this pie is all related to total undergraduate degrees, and then we're multiplying that total undergraduate degrees by some other weight. Okay, now based on the factors, here's a laundry list of factors that we're defining, and the total bachelor's degrees, the time to degree factor we're defining as the bachelor's degrees multiplied by your 6-year graduation rate. And then this institutional mission factor, I'm not sure why it's called that. The definition of that is the full-time student equivalent, undergraduate full-time student equivalents divided by 100. And that's divided into the degrees. A cost to degree factor, if you're aware of the cost study that's done for the universities, there are weights placed on your semester credit hours so that they become weighted semester credit hours. So the more expensive, what this does is that the more expensive the discipline in the semester credit hour cost study, the more points, the greater points you'll get for that one undergraduate degree. For example, liberal arts is a 1.0 on the weight factor for undergraduate, but we're using the upper division, so it's 1.69. So we would take the number of undergraduate liberal arts degrees multiplied times 1.69, and that's how many points you would get under that factor. If it was a higher weighted program, it would be more points. Critical fields, we take all the critical fields that are defined in the closing the gaps by CIP code, multiply the number of degrees in those areas by 2, that gets added in. The at-risk factor, take all the degrees earned by students that were determined to be at risk, and I'll go over those factors, and those get added in, so those count again. Those are the points for degrees, and then I've already explained the persistence factor. Now, this is how the points get done. It's an allocation, so it's whatever the amount of money that the legislature decides to put into this outcomes-based funding formula. We take that amount of money, divide it by the total points, and then your institution's total points gets multiplied against that unit amount, and that's how much your funding will be for this part. Now, it is a 3-year average, so we take all of the points for each one of the years that we're going to count, and in the example I showed you earlier was 9, 10, and 11. We've already updated the 12 numbers, so if the legislature adopts this proposal, it's going to be 10, 11, and 12 academic years. The degrees and persistence reported on those years. So we take the average for the 3-year average multiplied by the points, that gets your total points. These next slides I'll go over what accountability measure and where this information comes from. Total undergraduate degrees is accountability measure number 10. It's from the CBM 009. Time to degree is accountability measure number 9. And let's see, we're going to be using fiscal year 12, so it'll be the cohort starting in fall of 2006. Institutional mission, as I said, this is degrees divided by your undergraduate full-time student equivalent multiplied by 100. It's a very small, if you remember on that pie, it's just a sliver of the amount that's been allocated. So it's not, it doesn't account for a lot of the dollars. Cost of degree each year we have a weight determined for each discipline by level. We're using the undergraduate upper level for the weight. So liberal arts 1.69. Depending on what the weight is, you'll multiply that times the number of degrees in that code. That gives you total weighted points for the degree. Critical fields, all the CIP codes are listed on the right-hand side for the critical fields that we're using so any of the degrees issued in those critical fields will be multiplied by 2. We're also getting from SBAC, we're getting the teaching certificates in math and science. So those are, some of those kind of get delayed, but whenever SBAC reports them to us for that year that they were awarded, that will be considered as a critical field, and we'll add that in as an extra point on the undergraduate degree. At-risk students, there's 5 indicators. Primarily, you have students receiving Pell. Their ACT or SAT scores are below the national average. Their first time in college, they were a part-time student. They received a GED rather than a high school diploma. Their first time in college, they were 20 or older. Those are the risk factors that we're using because we have the data for those risk factors. And there's the data sources for that information. Persistence, we go back 5 years and look through the students at your institution and count, their hours. So even if they're a slow-moving student, they're not getting through very fast. If they take 6 hours a year, and we'll get them in that 5-year period. They'll reach the 30 threshold. The institution will earn a point. So it picks up both full-time and part-time students. As long as they're continually enrolled, they're going to be picking up hours, and we'll accumulate those. And when we hit 30, 60, or 90 hours at your institution, that'll earn you a persistence point. There's the data sources for that. It's changed since it is, some of that information started in 11. Prior to that, we're using the 001. Questions? Yes. Yeah, I can't hear.
Angelo State University students can choose from more than 100 majors and concentrations spread among 45 undergraduate and 23 graduate degree programs.
This is a reminder, if someone from Angelo State is still listening and not on hold, that you should not put your...
Angelo State University students attend classes in state-of-the-art facilities on a beautifully landscaped campus. Plus, with a thriving intramural program and more than 100 student organizations, there's always something to do.
We might have to turn the sound down for the moment.
Angelo State University athletic teams compete in...
Okay, Angelo.
Yep. Yes, if someone could email, that'd be great. Oh, it sounds like it stopped. Thank you.
No.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
thank you.
One of the things we noticed when we looked at that, the model was it was not normalized, so the variables are on different scale. But none of the variables are normalized. So the net effect of that is if you then look at the distribution of weights, at the end, the retention variables take up about 40% of the incentive funding.
Yeah, there's that pie. The pie that Gary showed earlier actually shows the weights. And yes, those persistence
No. What I'm suggesting is that the weights that are proposed are not the real weights once you make the calculations. Once you make the calculations, because the scales haven't been normalized, you end up to be about 40% of the. Well, I guess is this the actual?
Yeah, that's the actual weight. So you can see the 40% there with the 3 persistent variables.
I'll tell you that we ran through about 25 different models to engineer this initial proposal so that there was not a great fluctuation in funding from the schools from what they're receiving right now. So I understand that, that is 40%. Persistence is 40%. That is the way the Formula Advisory Committee that put this, of institutional representatives that put this together, this is the model that came up with the allocation of funds that was the closest to what enrollment is currently allocating the funds. So it wasn't put together not knowing what the data was going to do, because we ran models using existing data from the institutions. We didn't make up data. So we knew that this model was not putting, it's only putting 60% of the funds allocated based on degrees. 40% was engineered to do this on purpose.
So your point is that this is not really outcome-based funding.
Persistence is an outcome that we're measuring, and that's what the institutions wanted to include, is that persistence is an outcome leading to completion of a degree.
Right. So funding could shift if institutions change in terms of what they're producing. Then it's going to be based on this. What Gary is saying, I think, is initially this was structured in a way that the funding would look similar to what it is now. But obviously these measures would now be how the determination was made. So if your institution made a big change in one of these categories, it could affect allocation. Is that correct, Gary?
Right. Yeah. The 2 factors in here that I think normalized, when you say normalized, I'm talking about neutralizing change is really what we work toward. The cost of degree factor, which is basically the enrollment funding right now, is semester credit hours in higher cost areas produces more funding for the institution. So that factor brought it closer to what the institutions are currently receiving. And then the persistence factors of counting completion of 30 semester credit hours, the same as 1 degree, equalizes those 2.
Well, it actually benefits larger institutions that have large number of students that are retained. So there is a bias in the model. But there are 2. Let me make another observation. I think I understand your point about the factors that ultimately produce the model. The adjusted graduation, 6-year graduation rate, where you multiply the graduation rate by the number of degrees awarded, what is that supposed to mean? When you take the graduation rate of the first-time, full-time degree-seeking cohort and multiply it by total degrees awarded, what does that metric actually mean?
It's labeled as time to degree. We're trying. It is an incentive to increase the time to degree, or decrease the time to degree, for an institution of their degrees, of their baccalaureate degree students.
It's a meaningless metric, because we're multiplying graduation rate of a first-time, full-time cohort times total degrees awarded. 50% for some institutions are transfer students who have a very different graduation rate.
And the same thing could be said for persistence, because if you don't have first-time freshmen coming in and they're transfer students, you're probably not going to get 90 degree hours.
That's right.
The amount of, as you can see, the amount of points that were earned by 90 degrees is roughly half the 30 degree.
That's right.
Because you have transfer students, you have students that transfer from one university to another university. Those points. This is for retaining your student, the freshman student. You get rewarded for getting him from freshman to senior and staying at your institution.
It's actually, it doesn't make sense. It has no meaning when you apply to institutions that don't serve traditional students. And with if the majority of the students that you have are first-time, full-time degree seeking, then this approach makes sense. But it doesn't seem to make sense for anybody who isn't serving the traditional student. I mean, I understand the rationale behind it, but just couldn't understand how it applied across the board to all the institutions.
As we said in the Formula Advisory Committee, this is a start, and that's why it was engineered not to radically change the allocation of funds, and that this will be looked at every 2 years with the Formula Advisory Committee to be able to adjust weights and some of these metrics, like the 100 degrees per 100 undergraduate students, doesn't show up very much right now, but it's there as a placeholder that could be looked at in the future to impact other institutions.
Could I make a comment about this? This is Libby Barlow at the University of Houston.
Hello, Libby.
Hi. I want to actually underscore what Roy is saying as somebody who was on that Formula Advisory Committee. It's true that we used real data and looked at it quite a bit and ran several scenarios, but I think that the documentation will show that the discussion in the subcommittee was really about the weights given to each of the variables in the model, and really not about the percentage of dollars that would end up going to the retention variables. I do have a concern about the 90 hours for the reasons that Roy said, that transfer institutions or institutions that receive transfer students are punished in a sense, because if we get transfer students in at 60 hours and we get them to 90 at our institution, we're probably not doing the right thing with them. So I think that needs to be thought about a little more. And I also think we need to think further about the objective that we had, which I think is a good one, not to significantly change the allocation of funds. You don't want to cut an institution off at the knees with a radical redistribution. And so the model was really designed with the 10% redistribution of undergraduate funding dollars. There are proposals to move that percentage from 10 to 25 or higher, and no accompanying proposal to evaluate whether this model works equally well at 25 or 50% as it does at 10%. And so I think scaling up could be dangerous if these other issues that we've just been talking about are not better resolved than they are at this moment.
Thank you, Libby. We will be looking at it. We've already had some discussions. We will be looking at the weights and the factors. The Formula Advisory Committee will start meeting this August to review the next proposal. If this one doesn't get adopted, or even if it does get adopted, we'll be looking at the proposal for the 15-16 biennium to see what changes need to be made.
Okay, I think we probably want to move along with our agenda now. Thank you very much for your feedback on that. I was emailed a question about the PowerPoint. Gary, is that available online now? I believe Paul thought it was posted somewhere.
It's not posted
yet. Okay, so we will post the PowerPoint about outcomes-based funding. I think there's a lot of good detail in there about how the the measures are calculated. We tried to provide a high level of detail for you. Okay, well, next on our agenda we have folks from our Workforce Academic Affairs and Research Division who are going to talk a little bit about some of the things that are going on in their division. So James Goman and Lucy Heston are with us, or at least Lucy's here. I don't know if James is still back there. I guess he's on his way. Gary, the question was, where will the PowerPoint be posted? Oh, okay. I mean, I can certainly email it to everyone who's been at the meeting today. I'll do that. We can do that right away, and so you'll be sure to get it, and then we'll get it posted.
I just sent Sue Sutton an email asking her that question, and she said that because the people who are listening from their campuses are only able to see about 25% of it, she thinks that you'll probably have to email it out to everybody.
Yes, we will do that. We'll do that today. Okay. Oh, okay. Well, it looks like, is Jose with us yet? Or it looks like he's not. He hasn't returned. That might be for the end of the day then. I know he had a lot going on today. I'll just briefly talk about the critical fields review process. I don't think we need the slide for that. As you saw, without outcomes-based funding, critical fields is a component of outcomes-based funding, and it's something that has been a focus of our Closing the Gaps plan, and as we're moving to the end of our Closing the Gaps by 2015 plan and looking beyond that, we're also looking to review the critical fields designations for Texas. And so we have started talking internally about this process. We're working on a definition and a charge to a work group, but we will be putting together a work group that we anticipate will be balanced between institutional representatives and folks from the field, including people from the Workforce Commission, industry, community members. So we're putting that together now, and a letter should be going out to presidents sometime this spring, probably early spring, asking for nominations for individuals to be on the critical fields review work group. The goal is to have some recommendations put together to bring to the formula funding committees, which start meeting in late August and early September. So just a heads up that that's going to be happening this spring, and your institution will be getting a letter with more detail. Thank you. I think Lucy's ready.
Sort of, because James was supposed to go first, but we'll skip ahead. James is going to talk about the graduate program review, and I'll talk about the core curriculum and the undergraduate program review. But as James is on his way down the stairs, I'm going to skip over to the core curriculum very quickly and zip through that. In case you hadn't heard, we have a new core curriculum coming into town. Fall of 2014 is when the entire state will switch to the new one, and we are expecting core submissions to come in the next a few months from now. Quick overview, we have the purpose. This was developed by the Undergraduate Education Advisory Committee. They sent recommendations to the Commissioner, of which we then built the rules. This is the purpose, and the most important part, the 6 core objectives. That is what the institutions will be assessing, is the attainment of those 6 core objectives. The foundational component areas all look very similar to the current core, as do the transcripting codes. We tried to keep that as seamless as possible. We didn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We knew that we had SACS requirements and statutory requirements to keep these in here. So the hours, 42. We don't have a range anymore going up to 48. Everybody must be able to offer the option of a student completing the core in 42 semester credit hours. Everybody starts to freak out when they see the life and physical sciences. It only, she says in quote, 6. None of these numbers have actually changed from the current core. So we'll talk about how the component area option will help with labs and the like. What is different about this compared to the current core is these 6 core objectives and how they are mapped to the foundational component areas. Each course within the component area must meet the description as well as incorporate the mapped core objectives, the foundational component areas, which is the first aid. It excludes the component area option. So you can see here that for example, any course in the mathematics component must incorporate critical thinking, communication skills, and empirical and quantitative skills. Should have used one that had easier words in it. So those are those. LPC is language, philosophy, and culture. We went around about 1,000 times on the name of this one to call it humanities, not call it humanities, because humanities includes history and the arts. I mean, how do you do it? Thus the title, language, philosophy, and culture. American history and the government are statutory. That's why there's separate lines in there. The empty circles are optional. Looking at the component area option, there must be at least 3 core objectives, 2 of which are critical thinking and communication skills, and the third is dependent on what you're going to do with it. So the component area option. Courses can be split into 2 ways. Option A is where the at least 3 hours of this 6-hour block must match both the description and the aligned core objectives, as in here. Option B is the other 3 hours. Again, this is completely optional for your campus. Up to 3 hours, the course must match the description at least one of the component areas and include 3 objectives, the 2 critical thinking communication skills, and the third of your choice. So if it aligns almost with the social and behavioral sciences, but it doesn't incorporate, say, the empirical and quantitative skills, then you could put it in the CAO. This is also where you can put excess or overflow hours from the other foundational component areas. For example, you would like all of your students to take a second math course. You can put that in the CAO because it meets the description, it matches the core objectives. Same thing with any lab sciences or math sciences or even language. If you choose to put language in there, those labs can go in this area as well. Another option, it allows for student choice and institutional flexibility. If you have on your campus that you want all of your students to take a global initiatives course, that's an excellent place in the component area option. If you would like your psychology students to take 2 social and behavioral sciences, but you want your math students to take 2 math courses, you can have courses, students choose from a second foundational component area choice course in that area as well. So there's quite a lot of flexibility in there. Again, match a description and aligning core objectives. So what we're looking for in November 2013, which is rushing towards us at great speed, we're going to look for 3 aspects to the submission from the institutions. First is a narrative. How did the courses, how were they selected? What was the process on your campus? I've heard some excellent presentations from institutions about how they are going through that process. Some are starting from scratch. Some are tweaking what they already have, all sorts of things. Again, how is your faculty involved in this process? The second part is the core objective assessment plan. We are not changing that 10-year cycle of when you submit a review and evaluation of your core to the coordinating board just before SAC's visit. But what we would like with the initial submission of this core is, what is your plan for assessing the core objectives as an institution? We understand that this is a moving target. We understand that it will change once the ball gets rolling and you see what's happening on your campus and what works and what doesn't work. We would just like to see that there is a plan from the beginning, as opposed to 5 minutes before the evaluation shows up on our doorstep. And finally, obviously, is the proposed courses. We are in the process, and I'm crossing my fingers and doing all the good dance things that you're supposed to do, of letting you know that this is all going to be done through a portal, through the magic of the internet. So that you don't have to type the same thing 15 times. We don't have to type it the same thing, and something gets lost in translation. So all of this will be coming through online. We're going to make it as streamless and easy as possible for both ends of the process, and it will all eventually end up on a core web center that is accessible for students, faculty, and most importantly, advisors, so they can use it. We would also, if there's a course that comes across and we look and we go, underwater basket weaving, I wonder how that fits in the American History Foundational Component area. We would like if we could have access, or if you would provide us the link to your course information, your course syllabi, or any other relevant material that will help us before we go, no, and cross it off the list, which we won't do. We can have a little bit more information before we come back to you and say, hey, how does this underwater basket weaving course fit in your core curriculum? So that's where we're going with the link to specific evidence. Hopefully you've already got it through the public information link that was passed, the House Bill 2504, if I'm pulling that out of thin air, of the syllabi online. That would be very helpful if you could help us towards that. We're not going to ask for a syllabi for every single course. I think I would run away if that happened. So what's our timeline? Hopefully you're off and running. Some institutions have said, yes, we'll be guinea pigs and turn in early. If your institution will be ready in August, September, or October and would like to submit their core early, go ahead and drop me an email. If you turn it in early, we get you a response back early, she says, with a big promise smile. We do promise, as a staff at the coordinating board, that you will receive, you will have a final decision on your core curriculum by February of 2014. Now, I didn't say February 1, but by February 2014, the core for the state will be complete. We understand that you have 2 million things that are affected by this, least of which is this core scheduling for fall of 2014, and you'd like to know now. So we will get that back to you immediately. Everyone will start with all incoming freshmen will have a core, the new core in 2014. We do ask that if you have students, there is flexibility. If you have transfer students who want to switch to the new core, that is an institutional choice. Academic Fresh Start will go into the new core. And so most of the rules are staying the same as far as being tied to the catalog. Again, that's the institution choice on that one.
Lucy, I'm going to interrupt for just a minute because I understand the folks at home have had some technical difficulties seeing the slides, and that has been resolved, but they're going to need to refresh their page. So I just wanted to pass that along so they can see the full slides. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. That is it for the core. Any questions on that part before I turn it over to James? Perfect. James, your turn.
Before you turn it over, can we actually see the slides?
I'll be happy to send them to you. Can we? Is that okay? Because I don't.
Yes, we can send them.
Is that all right? We'll send. Send them to Sue, and we'll get them back to you.
Now, in fact, she can send them out.
I yes.
Thank you very much. And hopefully you can see them now if you have refreshed your page for James's presentation. Let us know. Please jump in if you're not able to see those slides, because I was told that has been corrected. Okay.
We're just seeing the changing of the guard.
Okay, so let's see how it goes with the slides.
All right, we'll give it a shot. Hello, everyone. It's James Goman. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Graduate Program Review. First thing I want to mention to you, if you haven't heard about it already, is that we have a graduate program review set of rules in place. We've developed some procedures, we've developed some schedules, but most of all I want you to know that this is an institution-driven process. You, the institutions, are in charge of it. You set your own schedules. You decide what consultants to hire. You decide what order to review your programs. You decide how to group them together. All those decisions are made by you. The parameters of the rules are, broadly, that all graduate programs must be reviewed at least once every 7 years. So some of you have 5-year schedules, 6-year schedules, 7-year schedules, 10-year schedules. There's no consistency throughout the state when we asked the Graduate Education Advisory Committee about this. So we tried to shoot for somewhere that was basically in the middle. Most institutions range between 5 and 10 years, so 7 was sort of splitting the difference. Master's programs need to have 1 external reviewer. Doctoral programs need to have 2 external reviewers. Keep in mind, as I've mentioned already, closely related programs may be grouped together for review in order to save you time and money. And that includes doctoral, master's, and bachelor's. If you want to throw bachelor's reviews into this, you're welcome to for your own purposes. We don't need to hear about the bachelor's review part, but you're welcome to do that as part of your inclusive process. Okay. The scheduling. Because there are so many graduate programs in the state, quite a number of institutions that offer them, coming up with a coherent schedule for this was a bit of a challenge. Okay? The first scheduling cycle starts this year and runs through 2019. The folks at the institutions, you are devising your own review schedules, and the only real limitation we're putting on that is that no more than 1/5, 20%, of your programs should be reviewed in any specific year. And that's just to give a break to our CB staff here. They're going to be looking through and reviewing your materials, and there's only so much of this work that we can do in a given time. Once you devise your schedule, you submit it to us for approval, and those schedules are set, meaning once they're approved, they're set, but it's not set in stone. If you have a good reason to change the review date for a particular program or set of programs, just contact me and I'll be happy to work with you on making those modifications. Okay. All of this is not, I repeat, not handled through email or through our usual online submission portal. So please, don't just send me your reviews out of the blue, because, again, there are so many of them. It would be impossible for me to keep track of them. That's why we've developed a software system. Our IT department has been working on it for some time. That's going to be an all-inclusive software program. It is how you send and receive review schedules. It is also how you send and receive review materials. Okay? What this means is that you work through the software populates a blank schedule using your program inventory. So all of your graduate programs will show up on the schedule. Then you, meaning someone in your provost's office, goes in, fills in dates for every one of the programs listed there. Then you send that on to me. I look through it. As long as it doesn't hit that 20% mark anywhere, we're fine and it's approved. Okay? Once we get to the point where we're ready to receive those review materials, then, again, you log into that same software, and you upload the review materials for whatever reviews are due, and you send them in to us. Please note that the system is set up to accept PDFs. So whatever format you have your own materials in, please scan them and put them into PDF to send them to us. Once those materials come in, I'll assign them to one of my staff, one of Lucy's staff, someone here in the Workforce, Academic Affairs, and Research Division. They'll look through those materials, and it'll be a lot like the annual doctoral reports that you have now. Basically, we look through, we make sure it's gotten a thorough review. We're going to look and make sure that you've substantively addressed all of the consultant's points. And what does that mean to substantively address? I can't define that for you because it's a matter of judgment, isn't it? It's always a matter of judgment because some things that the consultants recommend may be really expensive. Maybe you just can't afford to do them right now. So obviously it would be wrong for us to ding you for not doing everything they say, because maybe everything they say is, here's everything that would be good for your program, rather than just, here's what you have to do to improve your program. Okay? Once the staff have worked through that, then we'll send you back a relatively short commentary on each review or group of reviews, depending on what you're sending in. What are the elements of GPR? I'm going to jump to the end and say they're all laid out very specifically in Chapter 5, Subchapter C, Rule 5.52. But here are some of the highlights. The three basic pieces are the self-study. This is long, this is detailed, this is you assembling a lot of information about your program and preparing it for someone else to look at. In this case, the external consultants. They come into your campus, they look at your program, they probably talk to your faculty, your graduate students, perhaps your administrators, whatever it is that they do. They certainly look through the self-study carefully. Then they're going to issue a report to you. Here are the things here are the strengths of your program. Here are the things you need to work on for your program. And here are 5 or 7 or 9 or 12 specific recommendations for you to try to carry out. Okay? What we imagine is, and what I understand to be the case, is that then your department chair, your dean, your provost, your graduate dean, whoever is the appropriate set of administrators at your institution, looks through that consultant's report, and then you devise an official institutional response. Okay? The original rules said we needed to get that done within 90 days of receipt of the consultant's report. However, we heard from a lot of folks that that was a little bit too hasty, and that was too short of a timetable. Again, can keep it in mind perhaps the many different stakeholders on campus that have to be brought together, and the possibility that there might be serious financial issues here at stake. You might need a little time to figure out if your budget allows you to enact all these things that are recommended. We have now brought forth a recommended rule change to the coordinating board. That'll be going to the next board cycle. We're too late for the April board cycle, so this will be going to the July board cycle. And we're going to change that from 90 to 180 days. So rather than 3 months to respond, you have 6 months. Okay? So within 6 months of getting that consultant's report, you should have responded and then sent that response to us along with a summary of your self-study and the full text of the external consultant's report. Those are the three pieces that we need to see, but I want to note especially that the self-study I know is long and involved, and really a summary of that will do. Okay, and that was all of mine.
Thank you very much, James. Can the folks who are at their institutions now see the slides?
Yes.
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 Wonderful. Thank you. I'm glad that was taken care of. Next on the agenda. Oh, James, do we have a question?
We do.
Yes, a question.
When is the software going to be up and running?
The software has been up and running on the schedules part, but we've had some technical problems with it because every time that we update the program inventory, it messes everything up. The computer program is just too stupid. It can't tell the difference between, hey, look, Sam Houston State University has a master's in education in, EC through 4 or whatever it is, right? And then look, a week ago, a new program opened up, and it has a slightly different title, but it's the same zip code at the same level. Oh, that must be a new program. Hey there, Candy Taibbi, please give me a date for this new program. That's what's been happening, and so I haven't been able to keep your schedules set. They constantly get messed up. So we're trying a new approach now. I've talked to the IT people, and what we're basically going to do is we're not going to keep refreshing your schedule based on the program inventory. So once I get a schedule with you, it's going to be pretty well set. So in 3 or 4 years, you go back and look at that schedule, you'll notice, hey, James, these titles aren't correct. Yes, they are not correct, but it's still the same program, right? Yes. Okay, we're good. We're just going to keep it like that because of these technical problems that we've had. Now that we're trying this new approach, the IT folks tell me that we should have this ready to go by the end of the month, but I've said that before, so please bear with me. As soon as they get the technical problems resolved, we will be ready to start accepting submissions.
On that,
I have a question about external reviewers.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, question about external reviewers. Go ahead.
Yes. Do you have a set of criteria for how we select external reviewers, or is there a magic list?
No, this is really up to you. We give you a little more detail in the rules, but basically we say these people should be out of state. They should come from nationally recognized high-quality programs, and of course, again, that's a judgment call, but your faculty in your department, in your field, should know who those people are and should know which programs those are. Okay? Finally, they should have no conflict of interest with your program. And I hope that all of this is, even though we don't perhaps very closely define all these terms, I hope that these terms and concepts are so familiar to you that you won't need much in the way of definition.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Oh, hang on, Julie, because I'm going to talk about undergraduate program review.
Oh, wonderful.
So
okay.
back to me again.
So back to Lucy.
Program review for the undergraduate system, and also I wanted to talk very quickly on the low producing. The thresholds that were proposed, I believe it was at the January board meeting, the board did not vote on those threshold increases. The current thresholds of 5 undergraduate, 3 masters, and 2 doctoral stand. They have not been raised. The FY 2008 to 2012 low producing report went out to provosts and presidents in the beginning of February 10th and 11th. If you did not receive yours or have not received yours and would like a copy, please don't hesitate to email me. I'm at this stage, because they are just reports to you guys and not full responses of what you're going to do with that, I'm asking that I only send you that you only request for your institution. Once all final decisions have been made and any appeals have gone to the board in October, then the results will be published. But I don't want people jumping in and making assumptions that, oh my goodness, they're closing down 4,000 programs, which is not true. Just to give you a little bit of heads up, when the first year that we did the low producing report, we identified 549 low producing programs. This year we've identified 47. So yay, thank you very much. So that's all for low producing. That's running down the road. Now, the undergraduate existing program review has gone through about 4 million different machinations of what it is and what it's going to do and what we're going to measure and what we're going to look at. Thanks to Julie Eklund and Gabriella's staff, we've focused it down to purely quantitative information. It is completely different from the graduate program review. This is based on numbers. Why? Because there are thousands of programs to be looked at. We also realized once we saw the data, and you're going to have to bear with me, and I do apologize, that our current website describing the undergraduate existing program review is not up to date. It still has in there that staff will review programs and identify high-performing, satisfactorily performing, and underperforming programs. Once we looked at the data and once we dug further into it, we realized that's just not possible. It is not possible, even if you're in the same peer group, comparing, for example, a music program at UT and the music program at A&M is apples and oranges. So we decided to pull back and not do a staff review, but to do a staff evaluation of trends in the state and in peer groups as best we can. We would like to provide this information for you as an institution to use in strategic planning. We don't believe there is anything else like this out there where it takes such detailed information, everything down to time to degree, to persistence rate, to everything down to the 4-digit SIP level. So you're able to look at music programs, art programs, underwater basket weaving programs if you have them, and see down to the detail what is happening in your program at your institution, how it compares to your peer group, and how it compares to the state. So again, they are quantitative measures. They came from UEAC recommendations. They include enrollment numbers, persistence, transfer, completion and placement. Because we're looking at everything from applied associates to baccalaureate degrees, there's a variety of different measures we're looking at for the different programs. For the most part, the definitions do align with the accountability definitions, but there are some tweaks in there. I just wanted to throw this up so you could see that the detail of information that's in there for an institution. Not only when we're looking at graduation rate, we're looking at several subsets of information within that. Again, this is the first time out, and with any new toy, it's got a little bit of hiccups in it. So we are going through that, and we will be presenting this program, this system, to the board in April, at which time we will have our summary reviewed and be able to tell you where some of our hiccups are and where some of the amazing information is. This is just a little snapshot so you can see what it looks like, and I'll take you to the website in just a second. We are looking this year to do a summary report to look at psychology, liberal arts programs, and social science programs. And this is just a snapshot of the time to degree. And as you can see here, it's showing you the average number of semester credit hours and the average number of semesters it takes for a student to complete a psychology degree. These are students who are traced back 10 years to see where they started to get an average number over that. Again, with all numbers, there's an explanation in there, and I would like to remind you guys, as you probably can jump up and down and say, hang on a minute, if we went back 10 years, this is before they were 120 hours. So let's keep that in mind, that when you have 143.69 hours to complete your degree, those students probably didn't start off with 120 as their baseline. So we are aware of that, and we will certainly be taking note of that. I'm going to pop over to the website very quickly so you can see it. You can have it downloaded into Excel. This active report is kind of like Excel, but even better. This user guide will give you all the definitions to the to all the measures that are going on and how to use this application. But as you can see here, you can, for example, pull up a baccalaureate degree. We have 3 years worth of data. Here are all the different measures. Say you want time to degree, for example, and you want everybody in everything. It's going to take you forever to look at it. So let's look at philosophy, and let's just look at the doctoral peer group. Oh, and then it kicks it out, and see what happens. Let's do philosophy. Do a quick run, and here we'll give you the data for all 3 years, just for that peer group. You can multiple select, so if you want to do such and such, it'll pull those up for you. Anyway, I won't go into it too much. Again, this is for your institutions, for your strategic planning. At this point in time, and I'm putting that at the beginning of the sentence because I always like to say, as of today at 2:23 on March the 5th, there are no plans to use this system to close programs or recommend for remediation, if I can use that word in very general terms. It is for informational purposes only. At this point in time, again, on March the 5th.
Thank you, Lucy. Are there any questions? I do want to make sure we have time to do our summary of the sessions that we had this morning. But before we do that, Suzanne Morales-Vail, who's the Director of Developmental Education, is here with us, and she's going to talk a little bit about the changes coming for the Texas Success Initiative.
Thank you, Julie. Suzanne Morales-Vail, Director of Developmental and Adult Education. Just a quick update on what's happening with the Texas Success Initiative, our new TSI assessment, which will replace, starting your first class day in fall 2013, the 4 currently approved assessments. The implementation and development, the development is on track, well underway. We've completed the item review of all the items within the test. We've also completed the standard setting process. And the College Board is currently reviewing all the statistics, and we hope to have a recommendation. Well, we definitely will have a recommendation, a cut score, standard cut score recommendation for our cause committee on March 27th. And upon approval by that committee, we hope to have a presentation ready for the full board on April 25th. And if the board does approve, at that time, we will go ahead and release those cut scores so that your institutions can have those numbers ready for all of your brochures and all of your institutional information documents. But of course, those standards will be formalized in rules, which we hope to have ready for public comment, end of April to end of May. There's a 30-day public comment period, and hopefully have those all ready to go by the end of July. There's a couple of rule changes affiliated with the new TSI. The one that's going to affect you probably the most specifically is the pre-assessment activity rule 4.55, which, if I can use the vernacular, will outlaw students taking the test without any prior information. So no more cold turkey testing of the TSI assessment for students. There, in Rule 4.55, it outlines, it's very general because we want to give you enough flexibility using your resources and considering your students, what might work for them. But there are 4 minimal components that the pre-assessment activity has to encompass, and those are outlined in Rule 4.55. The demonstration, the Developmental Education Program Survey, which generally comes out every year, is going to be shortened this year. We know there's so many changes going on, so we're really going to focus on asking you how your institution is going to address Rule 4.55, the pre-assessment activities, and also some questions specifically about ESOL, just to get a better feel of what's happening in the state in terms of that particular population of students. In terms of any specific placement rules, we do not anticipate having any sort of rules or policies until after the first year, minimally after the first year of TSI implementation. We want to use the first year of implementation so we can identify the populations. What are the numbers of students who are college ready versus testing into the developmental education level versus the adult basic ed levels. So any policies limiting placement or prescribing placement, we don't anticipate, at least minimally until the first year of implementation, if at all, by the way. There are a lot of changes going on. Like I said, the best way to keep up is we are partnering. We have partnered with Austin Community College. We are doing a series of monthly webinars, and they are generally the last week of the month, usually on a Wednesday or a Thursday from 1 to 3 in the afternoon. If you can't attend live, all of the webinars are recorded, and the accompanying documents, including the PowerPoints and any of the documents shared during the webinars, are all available at our coordinating board website. If you go to our home page, coordinating board, on the left-hand side, click on P16 Initiatives, and then on that second page, on the right-hand side towards the middle, you'll see Developmental Education /TSI Webinars, all in capital letters, the word webinars. And if you click on there, you'll get to a page that not only houses all the archived webinars, but gives you an opportunity to register for the upcoming webinars and also to submit any questions and review any supporting documents related to not only the TSI, but also to developmental education reform efforts and policies.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. Are there any questions for Suzanne? I think hopefully everyone at the coordinating board has done a good job of getting the information out, so I think institutions now know what's coming and are anxiously awaiting that new cut score so that they're able to start amending their materials. But thank you very much. Okay, well, now we're going to, I think now that Jose is back with us, and he actually had several appointments today, so we appreciate him coming to join us. We're gonna take a few minutes to summarize the meetings that we had this morning about the accountability peer group criteria, just so everyone is on the same page and understands what the discussion was in the other group. And I think there are some commonalities and there's some differences. And I think if we can take a few minutes, since we have till 3, I'd rather take some time out from some of the strictly informational presentations that I'm going to do to have this discussion if it's needed about what we have in common and where we go from here. So, Jose, why don't you begin with summarizing the Emerging Research and Research meeting? Okay.
The research and emerging research institutions, we discuss all the indicators, the data, the research restricted research expenditures, PhD award and enrollment data, the program endowment, 25% SAT and ACT. It was recommended at the end to recommend raising the PhD graduate programs from 100 to 200 annually. It was also recommended.
That's for the emerging research category.
That's for the research.
I'm sorry. That's for the. That's what I meant. That's for the research.
Yes,
okay.
for the research. It was also recommended to take.
Hear you. Go ahead.
To take out with the at least 15 disciplines. So it's just, 200 awards. It was also suggested or recommended to look at the 150 million on. Instead of research expenditures, that's going to become restricted research expenditures, so that we'll have, so that we can compare apples with apples, and then look at the 150 and adjust it for inflation.
So leave the 150, make it restricted research expenditures, which is the data we were all looking at,
and adjust
it every year, just. Annually.
Adjust it right now.
Adjust it right now for inflation.
For inflation, and then adjust it every year for inflation.
So adjust it now from what it was set in 2004.
Yes.
Okay.
After that, the discussion was more of, okay, so if we have 150 restricted research expenditures for research institutions, why don't we just do 20 to 25% and do a percentage so that you don't have to go back every year and figure out and do create a new threshold on the emerging research institutions. So the recommendation is to do 20 to 25% of restricted research expenditures out of the research institutions or from the research institutions. So from that 150 million, let's just say it will be 20 to 25% out of that. It was also recommended to take out, again, the number of programs and then the enrollment in PhD programs.
Okay, so just those three metrics will be used, not the other information that
exactly
was provided, those three.
And then the other little thing is to increase the awards of 20 PhD programs or degrees to 30. The idea came about, or I guess we'll talk whenever the discussion, but I guess one of the ideas was to use this 20-25% of a baseline for all groups. So if it's, out of the research, if you want to be research, it's going to be that's the set standard or threshold.
Right.
And then to become an emerging research is 20 to 25 out of the other one. And then
the doctoral would
is 20 to 25% out of that, which is all based off the research institution.
Okay, and that is actually, when you mentioned that to me this morning after your group met, that's one of the reasons I wanted to come to this group, because that's something very different than what we discussed, and so I wanted to see if there was any feedback from the doctoral and the master's institutions about that recommendation. So it would back off from, you would have a certain amount of restricted research to be in the research institutions, and then 20 to 25% of that for emerging research, and then from that total you would take 20 to 25% and drop that down to doctoral. My guess is we probably wouldn't drop all the way down to master's, because we haven't included recommendations for research. It's a non-issue there, but probably just drop down to doctoral.
From doctoral.
And that would be where it would stop.
Exactly.
Now, for the group that met this morning, especially the doctoral institutions, are there any comments about that recommendation, since it would impact your groups? And some of this would be a question of looking at numbers. I think since we don't have the inflation-adjusted number for the research, that makes it a bit of a challenge.
One last thing. The other thing that we discuss is not the committee's recommendation, but the coordinating board's recommendation will be to grandfather any emerging research institution at this point.
Right.
So some of the institutions that are emerging research institutions right now might not meet the requirement.
Right, and I also shared with our group that the recommendation is to grandfather, and I thought it was the understanding that we would grandfather the institutions in the other three categories, so that if someone is already in a category, they will remain there. But however, to move categories, unless an institution would like to move down and request that, to move across categories, move up categories, would be they would have to meet the new criteria.
Correct.
So
and then these numbers are significantly higher. So
I'm sorry. Yes.
These numbers appear that they would be significantly higher than what has been the level before.
Than what's currently there. Okay.
Yeah, and then again, that's going to be the coordinating board's recommendation to the commissioner, to grandfather.
Okay, and in our meeting, there were some things that there were actually some similarities. One is that our group, as with your group, agreed that the information about SAT and ACT and top students who are in the top 25% really didn't have a place in the discussion, that it wasn't appropriate for designating categories, although there was some interest in perhaps having an accountability measure that showed students who were in the top 25% of their graduating class, because folks like that metric, but not generally for this purpose. We also talked about the fact that I think the data, we thought in looking at the data for all 5 institution types, that the data was fairly clear in terms of the top groups, but as you started to move down, we saw a lot of crossover on these different metrics across institution types. So we talked about, first of all, as I mentioned, not using the top 25% in the ACT or SAT, but looking at the other 5 measures and expecting an institution, once thresholds are set, expecting an institution to reach 3 of 5. And then once they reached 3 of 5 of those metrics, then they could move into that group. And we were talking about that generally, I think, for the institutions that we were looking at and not necessarily thinking about that in terms of moving into research or emerging research. But certainly for the discussion of what the data looked like for the doctoral, the comprehensive, and the master's, that seemed to make more sense, because there really was quite a bit of variability in the institutions at those 3 levels. We also talked about the fact that and I think your group talked about this too and came up with a different recommendation, but suggesting that once an institution reached the level needed, whatever the recommended level becomes, for moving into the next group, that they wouldn't need to maintain that level of performance as long as they did reach it. And in this case, if we went with the 3 out of 5 categories, in those 3 out of 5 categories, and I believe you said you talked about 2 years, that it would need to be maintained. An institution would have to maintain a level of
for two consecutive years.
2 consecutive years. So that's a little bit different. And we also, and I think it sounds like your discussion went this way too, that there should be a lot of focus on the research expenditures and not so much focus on numbers of programs. Is that correct? And it sounds like you were kind of coming out with the same thing. Let's focus on the money and not necessarily program numbers. So we had one recommendation to move some program numbers down. In fact, one of them was for the emerging research, but it sounds like you're removing that from the discussion. We did have a pretty comprehensive discussion about PhD programs versus EDD programs, and especially for the particular groups we were working with, there can be some real differences in those degrees for for some institutions where EDD degrees are very much research focused and others where they aren't. So I'll write up those recommendations from that discussion. But that was a bit of a challenge because institutions handle those degrees differently. But we did end up thinking the other 5 metrics, including the endowment, would be useful. And we also talked a little bit about rethinking some of the language about how the regional nature, especially of graduate programs, should be considered in the criteria. So hopefully that summarized it pretty well. But again, I think there really was a lot of variability across the metrics, and people were surprised to see that. And several people said they were going to bring the data back and look at it with some of their institutional leadership. So we had left it that for both groups that we'll write up a summary of what was discussed in case something is misrepresented or not clear. We'll get it out to everyone in the group for your comment, and I think we'll send both to everyone in the account. We'll send summaries. And if there are any comments now, as you hear what the other group did, if you feel very strongly that you want to make a comment, we can include that, or feel like the recommendations might change based on the discussion. Again, especially tied to the 25% of the restricted research. Please feel free to speak up. Again, this will after we get your feedback from the written documents, we'll take it to the commissioner. He'll develop recommendations and take it to our committee meeting and then to the board meeting.
The only comment I do have is if we look at the research expenditures as we have them laid out, and we use the $150 million, right, as our number. We haven't adjusted for inflation yet.
Right.
Only half of the emerging research institutions would make it, and only 2 of the doctoral ones would be appropriate for their levels. Seems like that's not quite a accurate reflection then of what these groups are. And if we're grandfathering in, what we're basically saying is we've raised the standard dramatically for anybody else coming in, but saved it for those of us that are in these areas, and said anybody else who wants in, we're not letting you in. It seems a little hypocritical to do that in the sense that if more than half aren't even making it.
Yeah, and the percentage is something that we have to take a closer look at. I mean, we definitely don't want to make it seem that way. But again, this is something that we're going to be discussing internally first, and then making a recommendation to the commissioner, and then the commissioner will make his recommendation.
And maybe we'll see if we can get some actual numbers. We can do an inflation adjustment and get some actual numbers and provide some scenarios. So here's 25%, here's 20%. You know, we don't have a lot of time, but if we could do a little bit, that might be helpful also.
The other thing with the grandfather, I mean, it could be that that the emerging research institutions would have a commitment to reach that at a certain point.
I think I agree with the grandfathering. I'm not saying that I'm against that. I think otherwise we won't have open discussion. So I think it's a real good thing to have everybody grandfather. I'm not saying that. What I'm just saying is that we probably want to make it a reasonable amount, looking at what the real groups really are, and then saying what's a reasonable amount that is representative of what these groups are as they exist, and then maybe make some ideas of where we want to increase little by little, but we don't want to make a description of a group that doesn't include more than half the group. Otherwise, it's not a description of the group at all.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think what we were trying to do is look at the gap between the emerging research institutions and the research institution. There is a gap there, and then there's not really a gap between doctoral and emerging research institutions. So I think that's another factor that we're going to take into account whenever we're basing that, what percentage to come up with, to actually define and have not a gap, but a difference between all 3 categories. So yeah, I do hear your concern, but we'll be looking at that too.
The other thing I did want to share, just so it's clear to the group that I was facilitating, that we Gabriella and I both raised the possibility of combining the master's and the comprehensive, but really didn't get any feedback about that. And then talking to some folks during the break and thinking about the fact that we raised it several times and no one seemed to embrace that idea. We're not going to put a recommendation forward. I think the message is that the doctoral, comprehensive, and master's groups are working well in terms of having them separated out into 3 groups rather than making any combinations. Even though we do see, again, quite a bit of overlap around the edges, and maybe some of that gets to Jose's comment about having a gap. There is a fair amount of overlap, but looking at the data for these measures, there is more overlap across these groups than when you look at the data for the research and emerging research. So it's in some ways the discussion is a little bit different for the 3 groups that we met with this morning, that I met with this morning. So we won't put that change forward. I was actually happy to see that Lucy, when she was showing the program review, that it is organized by the accountability peer groups. And one thing I did want to emphasize with the group this morning is that we use these peer group categories for several things, and one of them is for comparison purposes when folks go into the accountability system, for if we have meetings and have topics to discuss that are relevant for the groups and might, issues that might really vary in terms of how different types of institutions would approach them or the type of conversation they'd want to have around them. It's nice to have the separations. I think it's been very useful. And that's why this is a challenge, because you want to have some concrete metrics, but especially when you think about the comprehensive and master's institutions, you want to have some sense of their purpose, their mission, that they are appropriately grouped for comparison purposes. So we spent some time talking about that also. Okay. Well, if there's nothing else to add on that, we will get the materials to you. And then I just had a couple of new reports I wanted to show you very briefly, and I've got those on a slide. While I'm pulling this up, does anyone have any pressing ideas, brilliant ideas for changes for the accountability system for next year? Anything you saw this year that you don't think worked well? Measures that we really need to be thinking about as times change? Maybe things you've seen nationally or other states do. Feel free to jump in with those, and I will pick up my PowerPoint where I left off here once I can find it. Okay. And actually, I did include a little bit of information about the fact that our enrollments are down. These are just slides that came from a coordinating board meeting, and we'll send these out to you. But we have been spending some time on an enrollment analysis to try to understand where the change came from. I also do want to mention that there are we got new population projections from the Texas State Data Center, and we have actually incorporated those into our Excel spreadsheets related to population on the regional portal. So if you go to the regional portal, you can find those new projections. There's also a few slides in here about beyond closing the gaps. We are going to get institutions involved in responding to the plans and the process of developing the new vision beyond 2015. So I did want to mention that. Wanted to point out to folks, if you're not aware of it, that the latest news section of the new data website, we're trying really hard to keep that up to date. If you look through here, you'll see in fact, we did this a while ago already. A lot of these have gone away and we've added some new things. But a lot of people don't realize if you click on where it says latest news, you can see all the way back to May when we introduced the new website. You can see a list of everything new that showed up. So I hope this is helpful when people call and say, hey, is that report posted yet? Have you done this yet? We're trying to put everything on there so you can know when we've updated something or added something new. Okay, we don't need to go through the accountability changes. In terms of the almanac, thank you all very much for reviewing your data. We sent it out to all of the institutions and gave them a couple days to review, had a lot of questions, found a couple things, and I think it was also useful as a tool to educate institutions about how some of the measures are calculated. We had a lot of questions and had some good back and forth with IR folks on that. But the new almanac we're looking for an April 1 publication date, which probably means sometime in April. Okay, we're going to have a new app tied to the almanac, and it's going to be called Compare College Texas, and it's basically for mobile devices. So a student, a parent, a legislator, someone at an institution can get almanac data right on their mobile app, but it's going to be set up basically for students and parents, so you can compare information about institutions. So again, it's the data that's in the almanac, but presented in a different format and in a quick and easy format for students to get to. I envision a student maybe touring a campus and being able to say, oh, I'd like to learn more about this institution or see what this how this might compare. So that's new. And the other thing, we've got new distance ed data available online. We put this up in the fall. There's a lot of interest in distance education, so it's quite detailed. Just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of that. And we have something, I won't talk about 002 changes. We'll save that for summer TACRO. We also have something called the Post-Secondary Outcomes Dashboard that's coming. In fact, it may be up now. I'm not sure if it's quite there yet. We're going to have a couple new websites linked to it. Basically, this is data by ISD and by high school tracked through college. So it's a lot of the data that we already have available on our high school, our P16 high school to college data section on the web page. But this is much more colorful. We have a lot of graphs. An institution, ISD, can go in just for their school district and see several pieces of information instead of having to dig into 4 or 5 different reports. They can find information about where their students are enrolling, how they're performing based on TSI, who's enrolling where, enrollment by type, that sort of information. So that's new. And we also, in fact, I don't think we have time to bring Ginger Gossman up here, but we also just wanted to let you know we have some data modules that will be released very soon, and this came through the Pathways project, an interest in having something to educate folks at all levels of education about how to use data, how to evaluate programs, that sort of thing. So this is going to be coming soon also, and we'll have a link to these on our website. So that's just some new things that are coming down the pike. Were there any comments about accountability changes? I also wanted to ask, because we just had the one accountability meeting this year. One reason is because I was new and I really did need to concentrate on getting the data loaded into the accountability system. It's quite a major process to do that. But I wanted to ask if it works for institutions to meet once a year unless we have a special purpose, or if you feel strongly about having accountability meetings twice a year, as we've had in the past. Anyone have any thoughts on that? And obviously, if we have a special reason to bring folks together, we'll do it. But I know we've had good feedback about using this time to provide information about what's happening at the coordinating board in different sections, which is what we did last year, and we got positive feedback about that. Twice a year, I'm not sure that we have enough to do. We could have a meeting in the fall and talk about legislative changes, or we could save that till next March. So anyone have any thoughts on the frequency of the accountability peer group meetings?
Julie, I like once a year. This is Peggy from UH Clear Lake, but I wanted to ask one question on
Sure.
Gary Johnston's presentation.
Okay.
When will those outcomes be implemented, or are they actual, proposed, or they're going to be in place?
Well, Gary is not here, I don't believe, to answer that question. My understanding is they've run the numbers and provided them, the 3-year rolling averages as part of the formula funding runs, but that that this is going to be a legislative decision this session, so that if the legislature approves the model that is currently there, then information will be forthcoming about the implementation. If there could be changes, the legislature could make changes to it. They could decide that, no, this is not how they want to fund 10% of higher education. It could be a percentage change. It could be a decision not to use it all. So until the session is over, at least until something passed, we won't have clear answers to that. But feel free to contact Gary, because I know in terms of the formula funding runs, there may be some deadlines related to that. And anyone else have anything to add to that from the?
No, you're correct. It's just a proposal right now.
It's okay.
We'll know at the end of the session.
Julie,
yes.
Thank you for adding the first-time freshmen and the new undergraduate transfers to the accountability system, the one screen you showed us.
Mm-hmm.
If you could possibly add a column so that we could see that data by ethnicity, race ethnicity, instead of just seeing the total number at the bottom, I think that would be helpful.
Okay. So to disaggregate it the way we do with much of that other data. Okay, thanks. I will take that into consideration. Any other suggestions for accountability? Okay, any other general questions or comments about the meeting today? We will get the PowerPoints to you. If you have not received them already, I know Sue has been sending them to the folks who are listening at their institutions. Okay, well, again, thank you very much for coming, and we look forward to seeing you next time.